I can't remember the last time that I left the house. I do know that I ran out of my medication a few days ago, but the apathy that I was feeling just kept telling me to stay in, lock the door, and go back to bed. Not like I could afford it anyway, with no insurance to speak of and barely $10 to my name. Heck, the last grocery delivery that I got is barely hanging on, despite my depressed appetite forcing me to ration it. I had about 12 different voicemails from my mom asking why I wasn't responding, begging to know that I was still alive, but I just couldn't. It wasn't worth it because she wouldn't believe me anyway. Hell, I'm surprised she hasn't flown over here yet to drag me out. I can hear her now. You know that you're better than this, Daniel. Get up. Yeah, great motivation there. It was the voice in my head telling me that I was worthless, that it would be better for me, for everyone, if I just took myself out of the pool. It's not like I contributed much, just a struggling writer who posts horror stories on the internet. Not like it was enough to keep the lights on. Then again, I don't know if anyone would notice if I stopped paying rent in this shithole high-rise, other than the slumlord that already bled me dry like a damned vampire. He didn't even come around anymore, and knew that eviction wasn't worth the trouble. The cops didn't care about things out here, and this guy was already on their shit list. Must not have paid his dues to the police union lately. Loud discordant tones rang from my phone, sitting on the charger beside my bed. I don't even know why I bothered to keep it charged other than doom scrolling anyway. Not like anything was looking up in the world recently. I figured it was just another silver alert, some old dementia patient taking the keys when they shouldn't. My grandpa made it all the way to Mexico like that one time. Unlike his decaying brain though, mine found the idea of being outside terrifying. Just the slightest hint of stepping out of my apartment was dread-inducing, with the insane amount of things that could go wrong at every moment. Hell, just going to the grocery store can get you shot these days. Why risk it? Not the point. Check your phone. The sleep in my eyes wasn't leaving, taking every chance when I tried blinking it away, desperate to put me back under its dreamy spell. My hand darted out, limbs heavy, still not awake, and pulled my phone to my face. It wasn't even dark out, despite the blackout curtains making it look like it was the dead of night. No, the phone read 2:37 p.m., with the alert notification in full right below it. Emergency nationwide alert. All persons. Do not, under any circumstance, look at the sky. Please close all windows, doors, and any other way to view the outside world. Please shelter in place until the alert has been lifted. If you are not in an area to shelter in place, please carefully move to the nearest building with adequate shelter. Repeat, do not look at the sky under any circumstances. If you or someone near you has made this mistake, immediately administer the following emergency procedures. 1. Restrain the exposed. Rigid, stronger bonds are recommended. 2. Do not attempt to reason with the subject. They will tell you that they're unaffected. 3. Terminate the subject through dismemberment or immolation. Use both to be safe. 4. Remain hidden until this alert is lifted. The hell's going on? I mumbled, still in my half-asleep state. I'm barely through the message when a call starts coming through from my mom. God, I don't want to speak to her, but with something like that coming through, I want to think that it was a prank. Some joker hacking the system for some kicks, like Max Headroom back in the day. I don't know though, so I better at least set Mom at ease. Guess it's the best time to let her know that I'm alive. Take a deep breath and answer the phone. I hit the button, with Mom's voice coming in almost immediately, frantic and screaming. I barely make out what she's saying.
Oh my God, are you okay? Are you safe? Don't do it. Don't look out, please.
She was tripping over words and sobs started coming between.
Your father. Oh God, your father.
Mom, what the hell is happening? The sleep is shaking out with my fear spiking instead. She never sounded like this. Mom is always the tough, no-nonsense type, more likely to curse at a problem and beat it into the ground instead of walking away. I barely ever heard the woman cry, much less utter the word God without it being in Sunday school reference. Where's Dad at? What did he do?
He was outside doing yard work. You know how your dad is. Next thing I know, he's bashing at the door trying to get in. He's changing. I swear that his eyes are gone. He's practically foaming at the mouth, but it's like all his teeth are they're growing or something. They keep getting longer in his mouth and sharper. I don't know what to do. What do I do? He's trying to say something, but I can't understand the words.
The words are coming out more forced now, sobs more pronounced, and her breathing was cut short in fear. Whatever apathy that I had about talking to her before was gone, now full of fear that this may be the last time that I speak to her. Mom, you need to hide. Go in the bathroom, there's no windows or anything. Grab a phone, a charger, a knife, whatever you can. Don't look out, do you understand? Jesus, is that me talking? I haven't had this kind of command in years, and not since I burnt out around my mid-20s. Adrenaline is one hell of a drug. Mom, I need you to confirm. Do you understand me?
Yes.
She stuttered.
Winston was out there with him. He's gone.
Oh shit, their dog. Stereotypical bulldog name aside, he was a good boy. Probably got spooked about what had happened with Dad. No, I can't talk to her about that right now. Got to keep the confidence going or she'll break down completely. We'll find him later, he probably ran off.
No, he's gone. Your father has him. He's making something with the body, like a statue or something.
She was muttering now. Mom, are you moving? Are you going to hide? I asked again, pressuring her to keep going. I need you to hide in the bathroom, the one connected to your room, okay? Lock every door on the way and keep yourself safe. Please, Mom. Glass shatters as she screams, a garbled sound coming from nearby. There's a brief thud as Mom drops the phone, making it hit the hard wooden floors of their house. I can hear Dad's raspy voice speaking with something unintelligible through a warped mouth.
He has me, please, talk to him, help.
Her sobs were punctuated by scrapes along the floor with periodic thumps, shattered glass tinkling and crunching on the ground.
No, Jeremy, please, I don't want to go out. Come and see.
A hiss was barely audible over her screams. Dad's voice. I could recognize it anywhere, even through these strange noises that he was making.
Worship with us. No, please stop. Don't make me look.
Mom's screaming pleas are cut short. Complete silence on the other line before she suddenly begins to whisper.
Praise be.
Mom, please, are you okay? I was screaming into the phone now, holding it to my face on speakerphone to try and get any attention possible. Instead, I only got silence, punctuated by the occasional scream in the distance. Nobody answered my cries. I finally hung up, knowing that nothing would come from staying on the line. My only thought was that at least I had peace of mind knowing that my parents are already gone. It's not some mystery that I'll never know the answer to, so at least there's that, I guess. Now I know it's not a prank either, something really messed up is going on. Okay, be logical. The alert said don't look at the sky. Dad was outside when it happened, so that confirms something there. Restraining them makes sense now, but destroying them? Good God, that's bad if the government is recommending it. Maybe there's something on the news. As soon as the thought crossed my mind, I found the remote, flipping it to the local news on my hijacked cable. The anchorman was sitting there, worry on his face, as voices from behind the camera clamored in nervous agony. I get it, I got to hear my parents die. How many of these people have loved ones that they have no idea about? How many were there out of some sense of duty, trying to keep anyone who watched safe? We have yet to know if anything can cure the result of what's happening. What we have heard from the CDC and World Health Organization is that this is not an isolated event. This is happening worldwide, with the same symptoms presenting regardless of nationality, race, sex. Nothing is discriminatory about this. If you look at the sky, you are dead, effective immediately. If someone you know looks at the sky, immediately seek safety and isolate them. Restrain them if possible. This has a 100% infection rate and will not pick and choose who receives its horror. We hope to have a representative from the CDC on soon to speak. He was stammering, barely keeping it together. The phone ringing nearly made him jump from his chair, the sweat on his brow drenching his perfectly groomed hair. Well, yes, that seems to be them now. Professor Sigurd. Yes, this is Professor Sigurd. Please, if you're listening, we beg you to not go outside. Don't look out your windows, don't do anything that could expose you to a clear view of the sky. Something is changing, people. He was frantic, terror in his voice, but also menace. He knew something that the rest of us didn't yet. Please, if somebody you know is exposed, isolate and restrain them. They will try to expose you as well in any way possible. Explains what my dad did, I guess. The professor kept going, though. The only thing that affected beings want to do is reinforce their numbers. They'll do it through any means, even working together. The only thing that we know is that they speak of worship for whatever they see. He continued on. I'm sorry, Professor, can I ask a question? The anchorman said, holding a hand up like he was commanding the caller to stop. What the hell is up there? Well, as of now, we still don't know. We're attempting to see how we can view it without causing an infection. It's a drawn-out process of trial and error. He replies, shaking in his voice. It's currently unknown, though we have tried to see it through cameras and other means. But nothing comes up. It's like filming a clear sky. So recordings of the phenomena will not cause infection. The anchorman tries to clarify, a look of relief spreading across the nervous lines drawn taut on his face. We have only tried digital recordings, but yes, the infection will not take hold when viewed through recorded video. That said, we have yet to commence live viewing, only trying pre-recorded as of now. Please, use discernment and do not try anything that could expose yourself or others. Still rambling on, he sounded more panicked than before though. Something else was creeping in. I want to stress, and I feel that I cannot do it enough, to stay hidden from any of these things. They are no longer your loved ones. They are no longer the people you know, worked with, or grew up with. They are monsters, plain and simple. I turned it off. Not like I had planned to go outside anytime soon anyway. So no worries about looking at the sky for me. Now just to lock the doors and wait for things to blow over. Mom's screams keep bursting through my mind though, making me jump as if she were right next to me, shrieking for her life as Dad drags her away. It all felt so real that I just had to try. Picking up my phone and letting out a deep sigh, I called her number. Ringing. The steady and consistent dial tone sound as I waited for her was torture. I knew she wasn't going to pick up, so why the hell was I doing this? It's only going to go to voicemail, and then I have to hear her sounding happy. But the screen changed, video popping up as she answered a video call. The ceiling was visible only, their fan spinning lazily above, a spatter of red on one blade still dripping down steadily. I was holding my breath without realizing it, but whatever air was still in my lungs began hissing out slowly as I whispered, hoping against whatever terror was causing this. Mom? Mom, is that you?
Come and see.
A whisper barely audible over the phone speaker. Suddenly the screen is hectic, something picking up the phone and flailing around the room. Moments of chaos pass, finally settling on a face. What remains of a face at least. It was definitely Mom, or was at one time, but now the entire upper half of her face was gone. Like physically there was still the space, but the skin where her eyes and nose once were was gouged out, scraped raw to expose the bone and muscle in her skin underneath. Her eyes were totally gone, nose cut off at the base, yet I could still feel her staring at me.
Come and see.
She whispered again. No, this wasn't right. This wasn't my mother. This wasn't anything how she could be. There's no reason for any of this.
Come and see. Worship with us. The seal is broken.
I didn't even realize that I was practically smacking the shit out of my phone screen, shaking hands and doing my best to hit the dang cancel button for the call. The red button finally connected, the disconnect tone hitting right as Mom began to turn the phone screen away from herself. The open door flashing before me as it began to reveal the open sky. My eyes clenched shut as I tossed the phone away, praying for it to end. Why did I try that? I should have known. I should have known that it was going to end badly. Jesus, what's happening out there? I got my answer almost immediately. A loud explosion shaking the building, causing windows to rattle. Whatever it exploded, it was close. Screams coming from outside that could be heard even up here on the 15th floor. Another loud boom shook me again, this time feeling even closer. Close enough that the window in my bedroom shattered, bringing the noise outside in, screams echoing from below. Good God, what is going on out there? I could hear nothing but screams and chaos coming from below. The Atlanta streets in a frenzy, violence ringing through the air. People begging for their lives, pleading for their loved ones, all punctuated by that same phrase, come and see. As much as I don't want to, there might be something useful on TV, if it's still active. The screen came on, same channel as before, but the anchorman was now replaced by a woman. A small crying at the bottom of the screen reading out a new message. Martial law. All emergency services are suspended. That was fast. It had only been, 15 minutes? Honestly, time is a foreign concept right now. I threw my phone somewhere under the couch while I was trying to get away from Mom, so no telling what it was. The television didn't have the time either, just more warnings coming across the screen. Those same instructions to dismember or kill anyone affected by the thing in the sky. We're going to go live to Devin outside. The new woman on TV was stammering out, looking around nervously like she had no idea what to do. He's volunteered. Yeah, that's it. He's volunteered to go outside and film the sky for us live to see what's up there. 1 second, we'll switch to his feed. The screen cut out to the anchorman from before, now screaming and red-faced as others were dragging him somewhere. He was fighting back, but it was basically useless against the number of people around him. Whoever was recording was following right alongside, saying nothing while some messed up film was about to go down. The pale fluorescence around them made the beige hallway seem like the most mundane corridor to hell that there could be. Finally, they had reached a heavy metal door with the group setting Devin down and pushing his back against it. The camera was shoved into his hands, changing POV to show the scared man who was previously recording. Before Devin could beg for mercy, they pushed him backward through the door, the camera falling with a thud next to him on the ground. They slammed the door shut as Devin's sobbing and bleeding face is captured for the world to see, still lying on the concrete. Please, I just want to go to my family, please. He was choking out between pained sobs. Liza, please be safe. I'll be there soon. I didn't realize until the screen began to blur, but I was crying now. Jesus, I felt empty for so long that I almost forgot what it was like. Between seeing my own family and hearing what's on the streets, can't say that I didn't feel for the guy. Hell on earth, but he probably has no idea where his family is. I was almost rooting for him like I was watching some underdog at the Olympics when he left the camera behind, keeping his head down and running fast. There is a small car parallel parked right down the street. I'm guessing that it's his because he dug keys from his pocket before jumping in. Car starting with a jump before it was swarmed on all sides. People. No, the blood all over their faces said otherwise. Monsters. That idiot. A woman's voice cut in, feed switching back over to the studio news desk. The woman was beating her fist on the table, anger overflowing in her voice. Oh, sorry folks, technical difficulties. We'll be right back. The screen flashed out instead, taken over by the emergency alert system, same as before. The people down at the station must have lost the battle with their own sanity, turning on each other, not surprising. It took me a few minutes of searching and grasping blindly under the couch, but I finally found my phone again. There was a missed call from Mom. I'm assuming just to try again for her original goal, but I know what she is now. I'm not risking that. Let's see if there is anything else out there though. Twitter was a cesspool as usual, with plenty of conspiracies floating around. Reddit wasn't too much better. Some claiming that it was the end of the world while others said it was some Russian attack. Meanwhile, everything around the world was going through the same nightmare. People turning into monsters outside our doors, but were arguing on the internet about who's behind it. Nobody even knew what the heck it was. All of this complaining, all of this blame being thrown around, and nobody can even know because just looking up is enough to turn you into one of those things. The worst part is that it doesn't show up in photographs or videos. Not digital anyway. There was talk of trying analog recording methods, a lot of discussion about how digital can't capture it because of cybernetic cloaking or some shit like that. There's no telling what's truth and what's not at this point. The analog idea got me thinking though. God, where is that thing? I ran to the closet to throw open boxes still packed from moving over 2 years ago, desperately searching. Finally I found it, my old Polaroid that Dad got me for Christmas one year. This thing was vintage and he found it in great condition. I double-checked it was good to go, grabbing a pack of photos for it and loading them in. Camera open, the daylight seeping in from cracks under the window. I tested it out. The shutter gave a mechanical hiss, bulb flashing bright against the relatively dark room, and a small picture zipped right out of the camera's front. Alright, take it out, flap it around for a second, and good. My tiny studio apartment was all there, caught on grainy film against the backdrop. In a world that wasn't ending, this would be the cover of a Midwest emo album. Alright, step up, don't look up, just put the camera through the window and press the shutter. Don't even think about it. But thinking about it was the only thing I could do. Okay, start slow instead. 2 hands nervously reaching from this side of the curtains while turning my head as far as I could, trying to hold the bulky camera steady enough to snap the picture. I didn't even know if it would get a picture. Angle it toward the ground now, okay, and click. I could hear the bulb hiss, that same shutter sound before I yanked it back in, looking with fear at the undeveloped photo jutting out from the slot. Pick it up and give it a wave. Color began to fade in slowly, revealing the lush greens and browns of trees below in the Atlanta fall. Around the street, though, was a bloodbath straight from a horror movie. These things were just grabbing people, horror on their faces as they were dragged from homes and businesses, all being forced to open their eyes, looking up at the bright, cloudless sky above. Even in the grainy photo, I could still catch the fear in those people's eyes, some seeing their final moments against their will. Others were right in the midst of their own agony, gouging their eyes out with fingers, scratching any semblance of sight from their face with whatever they could find. I dropped the photo upon noticing a child with what looked like a shard of broken mirror from a nearby car, readying it in front of his left eye for something that I knew wasn't going to be good. Hell, I don't want to do this. I don't even want to try seeing what's in the sky. What if I can do something good though? Maybe contribute something good. Solve a part of this big, messed up mystery of a situation. I can try, right? Deep breaths. Deep breaths. Stick the camera through the curtains again and keep it steady. There weren't any taller buildings than mine nearby. The city is starting to level out into suburbs just outside of my window. This is it. A clear shot of the sky beyond, but will it work? Will it turn me into one of them? I mean, hell, I'm probably dead at this point. Still too scared to leave my apartment at the end of the world. Still worried about eviction or paying bills like there's even going to be a tomorrow. My finger clicks the shutter, that same bulb flash and hiss as it imprinted outside onto the film. Deep and steady, careful not to bump the photo as I bring it back in, making sure to keep looking away from the crack in the curtains, the world outside going straight to hell. I got it. I got the photo. Now just to give it a little exposure so that it develops. Jesus Christ. I see it. Clear as day, I see it. It's showing up on the Polaroid, this giant. It looked like a man up top, riding a horse like he was heading into battle. The horse was beyond dead though, skin and nerves flayed, exposing the dark red bloody muscle underneath. It was in motion as it was captured on the grimy photo, legs mid-pump, propelling itself toward Earth. No telling how big the damn thing was, but it was larger than the sun in the sky, threatening to blot it out at any moment as it cast a shadow over the world beyond. The rider was even more terrifying than the skinless horse, a charred, barely hanging on body with missing limbs. The foot was barely attached, jostling alongside the horse. Meanwhile, the face had its eyes gouged out, much like those below, but it looked like his wounds were cauterized, terrible burns marking the top of his visage as his jaw hung open, one side dangling down further in a lopsided grin. I wanted to throw up, wanted to scream and open the window wide to show myself that it wasn't real. I could hear something nagging at the back of my mind the entire time, a guttural, whispered voice struggling to speak through a destroyed throat. Come and see. Everything else in my head was screaming, telling me not to listen to that thing. It sounds so welcoming though, to look to the sky and let all my worries go to see the giant figure on the red horse. No, I can't let go now. I actually did something. I got some kind of answer right. I did something good. Who am I even asking at this point other than the voices in my head? At least some are telling me to live. It's better than most days. A scream pierced the air from outside, waking me out of the trance that I had been in. Hand reached out to the curtain in front of me to pull it back. No, can't do that. I pulled my hand back fast, like touching a still hot pan on the stove, dropping the Polaroid in the process. From lower down, the scream quickly died out, joining the now steady whispers growing loud enough to hear even this high up, all beginning to sink in their strange beckoning. Come and see. They must have gone through most of these street-level buildings already, which means they'll probably move up here soon. I can at least get the picture on the internet. Maybe someone can do something with it. A tweet, a Reddit post, anything. Hell, I'll put it up on TikTok if it gets the attention that could help someone. It only took moments after I had snapped a picture of the Polaroid to post it, and not long after that for comments to start flooding in. Hey, stop spreading disinformation. Cool picture, who drew it? Nice Photoshop, jackass, but the world is ending. I told you all to repent. Standard run-of-the-mill BS, of course, nobody would believe it. Why believe the insanity happening right outside your window when you can make up stuff on the internet? Jesus Christ, I might jump off the roof before I even get a chance to look at the thing. The flood of notifications started to make me just want to end it all, knowing that there wasn't going to be any help for anyone in this shitstorm of death. And when he opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, "Come and see." Oh, you've got to be kidding me. As many Sunday school lessons and church sermons that I've been dragged to in my life, all the Southern evangelical hellfire that I've heard, there's no way. It fit though. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, except this is the second one. Jesus, what was the first? The pale horse, I think. No idea where he is, but the second was the red horse. The one that was always brought up in sermons about the end times. Endless war and bloodshed to really bring everything together. We really, truly are screwed, I guess. A crash from below takes me out of my focus, remembering millions of Bible verses that I had to study back in school despite how bored I was. Hell, Revelations was one of the few that held my attention for longer than a second. The whole thing was like a metal album on the most hardcore hallucinogens possible. Seeing it firsthand is much more terrifying. It's the end of the world outside. A bloody horse and an undead rider are hurtling through the sky, and I feel whelmed. Maybe it's just the lack of meds in my brain deciding that it's not the worst thing that could happen. But the end of the world feels like a damned relief. Or at least it did until the noises started going downstairs. Crashes at first, mixed in with some of the few sporadic screams left in the streets. And then it started getting even closer though, working from the street through the thin walls of my building. Screams below my feet outside my door. They were finally coming after us. My phone let out a loud siren again, another alert coming through during the chaos. I looked down, seeing if there was any message for safety, shelter, an answer to any of this. Come and see. That was it. The emergency alert was just the same thing. Everything's over. I don't know what to do. I'm safe in here, I think. I don't want to risk opening my door because they might come in here. No, stay here, stay in safety, don't look outside. Come and see. A voice, but not from the streets below me or even outside my door. It sounded clear enough to be right in my ear, standing right beside me, pushing me to go look. Why not, right? I had already seen the picture, not like looking at the actual thing could break me much at this point, right? No, I have to figure a way out. Don't think about looking at the dang thing. Just get out and try to find shelter elsewhere. The basement. There's a basement level that has sewer access, I think. Can't see the sky if I'm underground. Can't get exposed by those things if there's nothing to make me look at it. It's perfect. There's no rhyme or reason to it. My BPD brain just suddenly said, "You can get out of here." And next thing I know, I'm just rolling with it. The energy is here, so I'm not letting go. I don't want to die as much as I'm okay with the world ending. A knife, a flashlight that barely works. Wasn't much to choose from in my empty apartment. I have to give myself some credit. At least I wasn't a hoarder. It took all of 5 minutes to get ready and then 1 minute for all my hopes to get to the basement to fly right out the window. Noises grew louder, the screams advancing up the building along with something new. The smell of smoke. Oh shit, is all that I can whisper shout to myself as things get worse. I brace myself standing in front of the apartment door, eyes closed tight, praying to whatever God would send this hell to us that they weren't going to be right outside just yet. Reach for the knob, get ready to turn, fling, and run. Jesus, the knob was hot and the fire was already close outside. There might not be any way down, they're probably trying to flush us out. I grabbed a towel off the bathroom sink, wrapping it around the knob this time and pushing it open. Flames were already lighting up the dingy hallway, lights flickering out as fire tore through the electrical system. Whatever fire safety system that they had in the building wasn't doing anything. An alarm ringing without any sort of sprinkler even attempting to help. Smoke was rising high, covering the ceiling before the flames could take it first. Only time was keeping it from burning. Alright, change of plans, run the other way. The stairs are on the other end of the hallway, with only hopes guiding me to see if they would still get me down to ground level. Bursting through the emergency door was like hitting a wall of heat. Fire already rising up from the ground floor under the winding stairs below. No way down, only up. Screams echo behind me from the hallway. Creatures running through to pull out flaming bodies, tossing them from windows to see the sky outside. There's nothing that could get me back there. These damned things are already swarming this floor in droves to take more for their own. No, this was it. Face them or burn below. Neither are any kind of fun way out. Hell, both are going to be painful, and I would rather not do any form of pain. Come and see, come and see. One of the things was practically chanting with glee back in the hallway. Maybe it was better if I took myself out, not give them the chance to get a new recruit. The knife in my hand could probably get right through my neck easily. Maybe if I went through the ear, it would keep me down. My only worry is that they'll get to me before I can actually die. No, the knife wouldn't work worth a damn. The only other option is up there. The stairs above me were clear of any flames, just smoke rising slowly to build up above. There was a roof access door up there. Usually it's where the teenagers would go to smoke without getting caught, but it would make a good place for a final bow. 26 floors and I'm on 15. I better start running. Except before I can get moving, one of them sees me. It screams, running for me in a frenzy while still repeating the same verse fragment. Come and see, come and see. It was in my head at this point too, screaming on the outside and the inside. There's no escaping it. As soon as it began after me, more joined, running from rooms in the opposite end of the hall, pouring toward me in a chorus of the damned. Down below, more ran up the stairs, flame covering their bodies like living funeral pyres, all coming to attend my wake. No time to hesitate now, I guess. The stairs were taken two at a time for the next 5 floors at least, but that was about when I started feeling how out of shape I was. The adrenaline was going wild, but my lungs were burning. Floors above were no better than mine, with creatures already starting to flush through from the roof down. I wouldn't be surprised if there were people up there when everything went to shit, considering it was easier than smoking on the street for most people. Rising flames kept anyone from escaping though, leaving them to either jump to their deaths or be forced to look outside by the demons. The air was getting thin up here as the smoke continued rising, making me cough through labored breathing. Floor 22 now, screams echoing behind me as the same creature that saw me initially kept following. Maybe it's some sort of hive mind that they have, because this thing was forming a whole group to run after me, just a couple of flights of stairs behind. Some of them were on fire, spreading the blaze around to others as they packed in tight on the narrow steps. They didn't stop though, all frothing past each other to get at me. Keep climbing, keep climbing, keep climbing. Gritting my teeth and taking the deepest breath that I could finally do, it got me to the roof access. A huge red door with an emergency light blaring above it, loud buzzing from the fire alarm letting everybody know that the world was screwed. The damn thing was already swinging open and closed hard, wind outside fighting with hot, flaming air inside to see who would win. Come and see, worship with us for the time is near. So many voices down below on the stairs, all screaming out in the same terrifying rumble, eyeless faces smiling up at me in bliss. They weren't afraid, weren't driven by any kind of hunger or goal. They were just happy. It's these same looks that I would see in the adults during church services, those same smiles of being assured in their place in the world, even after they had stepped out of that building and acted like a whole different person than they claimed. That same fake smile stayed though, making the damaged half of their face look even more terrifying in contrast. The chorus of hell continued as I ran out of time to open the door. They were almost upon me when I finally got up the nerve, walking close and closing my eyes before stepping out. I can visualize the entire roof in my mind after being up here so much. Straight ahead is the AC unit for the building. To my right is another, shorter building that could interrupt my fall. My left was the best destination. Over the side, right down onto the paved street below, still probably teeming with these terrors. I don't have a choice. The voices grew louder behind me, screaming, "Come and see!" So loud that it began to make my ear buzz with static, deafening its power. Run, run, keep running. It's all that I can do to keep moving, but I eventually hit the edge, barely stopping myself from falling right over. Stop for a moment and make sure you do this right. Climb up, take a stand, don't face the road though. No, if I see what's below, it's going to make me stop. Don't stop, I can't stop. I have to end this myself before they can end me. With my feet on the concrete edge, the wind beginning to hit me hard, almost knocking me off balance and into the pavement below. I open my eyes to see the creatures pouring out of the access door running behind me. I step back, falling backward to face the sky above, losing any stability and giving myself to gravity. Come and see. The voices rang out again. The sun was bright, but in the moment I fell back to the ground with nothing but the high sky above me. Their words echoed louder, and I saw, finally I saw, while a loud and thunderous chorus all combined into one singular voice, ringing out once more. Come and see. I beheld a red horse galloping through the sky with immense speed. War sat upon him, a massive sword held in frail, decaying hands, slicing the air as more and more on earth cut each other down, brother killing brother. My last sight before gravity turned me on my head was the horse, his eyes burning bright with the heat of the sun, pure hatred burning in its face. As my body turned, seeing the creature began to make me feel at peace. This was our fate, but was it a bad fate? The Messiah will be here soon, and the horseman is just bringing his good news. War will be a blight on the earth no more, with no humans left to foster aggression toward one another. Now we would all come together in worship, spreading the good news of what's to come by opening the eyes of others. My eyes are open now, though these eyes cannot yet comprehend the beauty of what I've seen. No, I'll need to open up my real eyes, the ones underneath these, and then I'll be able to see the true beauty of what's to come, the true salvation all this bloodshed will bring, the coming of a new kingdom built on the bodies of the damned. The last fading thought that I have is the same phrase that brought me terror just moments before. My lips part, pushing words out in a whisper against wind trying to rip them through my throat. 3 final words before the pavement meets my head. The old me's plan working perfectly as I hit skull first, spilling my brain over the concrete. My lips still manage to finish the final word though, twitching as the rest of my body falls to the ground. Come and see. Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. So you sign up for something, forget about it after the trial period ends, and then you're charged month after month after month. Sounds familiar, right? The subscriptions are there, but you're not using them. In fact, I just learned that 85% of people have at least one paid subscription going unused every month. But thanks to Rocket Money, I can see all of my subscriptions in one place and cancel the ones that I'm not using anymore. And now I'm saving more money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps today. That's rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. I don't know how you'll receive this message, but you need to wake up. Those were the words that occupied my television screen. Moments before, I had been watching an old Western movie with my wife, sleeping peaceful in my lap. It was just past midnight, which meant that I must have dozed off at some point, as the last time that I had checked it had been just past 10, and work in the morning would be another exhausting adventure. But the words that had replaced the movie brought me straight back to attention, The world you live in is wrong. Wake up, Jack. I sat frozen in my comfortable chair, momentarily forgetting everything that existed around me. The name, as generic as it was, felt familiar, but it wasn't mine. My wife let out a slight groan, probably dreaming something and talking in her sleep as she often did. I considered if I had actually fallen asleep myself, if I was dreaming. The only way to make sure was by letting someone else confirm what I was actually seeing. "Mary, honey, wake up please," I said as I gently shook her. She looked so calm, as if all the horrors in the world didn't matter as long as she was safe by my side. I took a moment to just admire her, and when I looked back up, the weird message had been replaced by the roll credits of the Western movie. The clock read 1:34 a.m., meaning more than an hour had passed since the disturbing message had popped up. Time had skipped, but to me, no more than a few seconds had passed. I remembered then that looking at the time while dreaming produces weird results. It had to be a nightmare, nothing more. Yet I couldn't bring myself to wake up. I convinced myself that the message had been a product of my sleep-deprived mind, that I existed somewhere on the edge of reality with one foot inside the realm of sleep. Defeated and not feeling ready to get up for work in the morning, I just picked up a blanket and I tucked my wife in. I was considering whether or not to just carry her with me to bed. It wouldn't be too hard considering my size, but I didn't want to wake her. Before I knew it, I suddenly found myself halfway up the stairs, walking towards our bedroom. I took a glance at my watch. The time read at 2:04 a.m. Another half hour had just vanished. The realization hit me like a brick. I had never sleepwalked before, nor did I have any history of absent seizures. And then I noticed the painting on the wall. It was one that had always been there, but one that I had never taken a second to observe. Realistically, I knew my wife had hung it up there when we had moved in together, but it was so distant, as if it only partially existed when no one was looking. It depicted a group of people standing outside an ancient building, all of them wearing strange black gowns. In the dark, I couldn't truly tell whether it was a painting or an actual photograph, but my mind leaned towards the former. They were holding hands, but a lot of them were missing body parts. Hands, legs, one even half their head, and none of them were smiling. At the bottom, there was a piece of handwritten text. "Trial and error, the first test, 2013, it read. The year felt so odd. Both the building and outfit seemed so much older. Just staring at it produced a growing feeling of dread within my body. Goosebumps formed on my arms, and I knew that time had come to get some much-needed shut-eye. No sooner had I made that decision before the world turned dark around me. Seconds or maybe minutes passed, and I awoke in my bed with my wife sleeping next to me. The sun had just arisen above the horizon, letting rays of warm sunlight penetrate our beige curtains. The events of the past night were already fading. It had to have been a dream. There was no other logical explanation. "Are you okay?" Mary asked with a tired, groggy voice as she noticed me staring out into the world outside. I was standing in front of the window wearing the shirt and trousers that I always put on for work, but I couldn't remember standing up or getting dressed. "You look tired. Couldn't you sleep?" I don't know," I stuttered. "I had some weird dreams." The light outside looked so strange. It was perfect in every sense of the word, rid of any obvious faults. It shined brilliantly through the clear blue sky, only interrupted by a few pure white clouds. A brilliant orange gradient painted the horizon with trees dancing gently in the wind. "That's the third time this week, Gary." Gary, that was my name, though it felt all too foreign. I had known it since I could form coherent words as a child, yet it somehow didn't suit me. "Maybe you should schedule another appointment with Dr. June," Mary suggested. I agreed only because I had known him for years. He had helped me through some trauma, though I couldn't fathom how he would possibly analyze my dreams in any meaningful way. I called him after breakfast, and to my luck, he had just happened to have a free session that morning. I let my job know that I would be late due to an appointment. As usual, they were more than happy to accommodate me. "Gary, it's great to see you on this fine morning," Dr. June said with his usual level of enthusiasm as he welcomed me into his office. He had always called me by my first name, claiming that it made people feel more comfortable, letting them open up more. I couldn't deny that claim. The man knew pretty much everything about me. I told him about my dreams, and he jotted a few notes down into his book as he passively listened. "Gary, why don't you tell me what you think these dreams mean?" It was such an obvious question, yet I never saw it coming. I hadn't thought much about it. My concern was mainly getting rid of them and not understanding them. Though lately I had struggled to figure out whether or not they were truly dreams and not a twisted version of reality. "It's like my life isn't real," I finally answered. "Sometimes I have flashes, pictures of people that I don't know, but they all seem so familiar. I don't understand." He asked a few more questions after that before sighing and looking at me. "Gary, we've been talking about your dreams now for the better part of this year, and they're not getting better. While I'm not ready to give you a certain diagnosis, I would like to put you on some kind of medication." "Drugs? What kind?" I asked. He sighed again. "That's the thing, Gary. If I tell you how it works, you might be resistant to it. This medication is brand new, and I've had good results with other patients suffering similar world-breaking ideas. I would like to put you on it for just a few weeks. If it works, great, we'll talk again. If not, or if you suffer from any side effects, we'll just stop the treatment. I'm not supposed to do it this way, so I need to know if you're on board." I looked at him with a questionable expression plastered on my face. He had always been good to me, never doubting nor judging my stories. I trusted him more than most, so despite not being one to trust unknown drugs, I decided to give the treatment a shot. "All right, Doc, you know best, I suppose." He handed me an unmarked bottle of pills with the simple instructions of taking one each day before going to bed. That was all that it would take to cure me of an undiagnosed disease that had been plaguing me for months. Once the session had ended, I headed to work on foot. My car was stored safely in a nearby garage, and I needed the fresh air to clear my mind. My mind drifted to the deepest parts of my mind, and as it did, the same weird flashes passed before my eyes. Images of people, places, and times that felt familiar, yet all too distant. They weren't mine, they couldn't possibly be, yet they were there. I was only jolted back to the world outside as I heard the faint sounds of somebody crying. It was a girl sobbing in the distance. Her voice echoed unnaturally through the busy streets, and while it took me a while to pinpoint their exact origins, I saw her standing in an alleyway on the other side of the road, ignored by the dozens of pedestrians walking by. I hesitated for a moment, worrying that it might look odd for a massive guy to approach a strange child, but I figured that I could help by at least calling the police or aiding her in finding her parents. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked calmly as I approached her. She couldn't have been older than 8. She wore a school uniform and had bright blonde hair. "Where's your mom and dad?" I asked. She looked at me with a mildly shocked expression on her face. "They're not here. I want to go home," she said. "Where do you live?" She looked around herself. "I don't know, I don't like it here. This isn't real, I want to go home," she repeated. "What do you mean this isn't real?" "Nothing is real, my parents were gone. The new ones aren't the real ones. They are not my parents. No one is real." She was getting increasingly more upset with each question, but what she said struck an eerie chord with me. Before I got the chance to ask any further questions, I heard the sound of sirens appear behind me. A police car parked on the side of the road and a couple of officers emerged. "Joanna," one of them asked. The little girl looked at me. "Don't let them take me," she yelled with fear in her voice. "Hey Joanna, it's okay, we're gonna bring you back to your mommy and daddy," the policeman said. "No," she screamed in protest as he approached her. "You're not real, go away." I looked back and forth between the little girl and the police officers that seemed as confused as myself. Hey, wait a minute. I tried to interject. Sir, this girl is sick. She needs help. They argued back before I could make my case. But, just stay back, all right. We'll take care of it from here. She turned around to run, but there was only one exit out from the alleyway, and it was blocked off by the officers. Though my first instinct was to help, I didn't want to get arrested or worse. They seemed genuinely interested in helping her, and logically I could understand why. But despite their actions making perfect sense, the situation just didn't sit right with me. Please, don't let them take me away, she cried again. She was taken away before I could properly process what had happened. In my mind, I promised myself to call and check up on her, but once she was out of sight, it was as if my brain struggled to recall what had happened only moments before. Whatever the case, work beckoned and I had to go. It wouldn't be a particularly productive day, but my job entailed little more than tedious paperwork. Whether or not I was actually working, nobody would ever know as long as I pretended to look busy. Once at my desk, I pulled the bottle of pills out to study them. The box wasn't labeled, nor did it come with instructions. It was only a container holding 30 small, white, and indistinct pills. I rolled one of them between my fingers, trying to understand how something so small could possibly change my life. While the little pill lay in my hand, my computer screen suddenly came to life. It was a black image with a bit of text centered in the middle. Don't do it, Jack. It lasted for a split second before going back to normal. Just that simple message, nothing more, nothing less. Whether they were talking about the pills or if they meant something else entirely, I didn't know. Whatever the case, I couldn't stay at work. I told my boss that I was feeling sick, and like the great man that he's always been, he let me go home early. Once there, I just collapsed on the couch in front of the TV. Mary wouldn't be home for several hours, working overtime trying to complete a project, but I didn't mind. I made my way to the fridge looking for some food. There is a plate of my favorite meal there prepared by my wife. I know you're under a lot of pressure. I just want you to know that I'm always here for you. Hopefully this makes you feel a little bit better. Love you, Mary. I let a brief smile break out, the first one in over a week. She truly was the best thing that had ever happened to me. I needed to get healthy again, if only for her sake. A modicum of happiness built up inside me as I devoured the meal in front of the television, each bite as perfect as the last. On the side table beside me stood the bottle of pills, and the time for the first one was nearing. I picked it up and held it in my hands as I kept my eyes glued to the movie that I was watching. And then as I twisted the lid off, I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. And then the television screen turned dark, filled with little more than a simple sentence. Don't take the pill, Jack. That was the last push I needed to bring me over the edge. I didn't know whether or not I had lost my mind, but I didn't care. What do you want from me? I shouted at the television. Look at the painting, was all that I got in response. At first, I didn't understand what they meant. It was such a nonsensical message on its own, but then I realized how I had been extraordinarily fascinated by the painting on the stairs the day before. How I had been frozen in place before it for almost an hour. The black screen turned back to the movie and I put the bottle of pills down. I walked over to the stairs with the weird picture hanging on the wall halfway up. The sun had just set, casting eerie shadows throughout the house. It obscured the picture to the point where I still couldn't tell whether it was a photograph or a realistic painting. Time passed and it started getting darker outside. Still, I just kept staring, not sure what I was looking for. Gary, what the hell are you doing? My wife called as she found me standing on the stairs. I've been trying to call you for hours, why didn't you pick up? Hours had passed and evening had turned into early night. It had just passed 11 p.m., and Mary had been stuck working overtime trying to get in touch. I had been standing there staring at the picture for hours. The picture, where did you get it? I asked. Mary looked at me dumbfounded before turning her attention towards the picture on the wall. A confused expression formed on her face and she approached me to inspect it. I don't really know. I'd never noticed the picture before, it was always just kind of there. Her comment confirmed every bit of oddity surrounding the picture. I reached out my hands to remove it, but Mary grabbed my arms before I could reach it, stopping me. Why are you stopping me? I asked. I don't know, I'm just scared. I felt it too, the hesitation and worry about what lay behind it. But still I grabbed it and unhinged it from the wall. Once gone, all it revealed was a spot of absolute nothing. What is that? Mary asked in shock. I hadn't the faintest clue how to answer the question because what existed behind the painting was literally nothing. A hole in the fabric of reality that had existed long before our times in that house. At least I knew it wasn't just a dream. The world was real, but something had gone horribly wrong, and for some reason, I knew it would only get worse from there. It wasn't an easy task to comprehend the mess in front of us. The emptiness didn't just appear as a black hole or an invisible surface. It was more akin to what one experiences when closing one eye and trying to explain what it sees. Not darkness nor colors, simply nothing. Gary, please talk to me. Mary begged as we stared at the break in reality. I looked over to the pills on the table back in the living room. They seemed so sinister then, as if the psychiatrist knew what I was about to experience. There wasn't anything wrong with me. Instead, it was the world that had been damaged. And then I turned to my wife to embrace her, to reassure her that everything would be all right, despite not believing it. But as I went to wrap my arms around her, the world around me simply vanished beneath my feet. I fell into an infinite void of darkness before finally feeling an electrical jolt surge through my body. When I opened my eyes once again, the world around me was blurry. I tried to reach out my arms to gain a better understanding of my surroundings, but they were too weak and in pain. Apart from wiggling around, I could barely move. That's when I realized that I was locked inside a glass capsule. Somebody was knocking on the glass, a woman standing on the other side. "Jack," she yelled. I tried to respond, but there was something in my mouth. A tube that forced air into my lungs, expanding and deflating them against my will. It was a life support system, but not one found in any hospital. I used all my strength just to reach out my hands, silently begging for the person on the other side to save me. But before they ever got the chance, I was flung back to the reality that I had come from. Mary stood over me, trying to shake me awake. "Gary, please," she yelled as I regained consciousness. I was lying on the floor, soaked in sweat. I felt unnaturally cold, as if my body had been dead for hours, completely stiff and pale. "Did you see that?" I asked with a groggy voice. "See what? You just passed out." "There was a woman. She called me Jack," I said. "You were passed out, Gary. It wasn't real." I wasn't entirely convinced, but the memories were fading all too fast, akin to a dying dream in the early morning hours. For each second that passed, the images of the glass tank and the woman standing above me were disappearing from my mind. I redirected my attention towards the empty space on the wall. It was an impossible phenomenon, one that neither of us had the comprehension to explain. Before we got a chance to discuss the matter any further, a loud beep emitted from our television. We turned around, peeking into the living room where a single word had been plastered onto the screen. "Run." For a moment, I just stood there dumbfounded and still unconvinced that I hadn't absolutely lost my mind. It wasn't until Mary spoke before I snapped back to reality. "What's happening?" she asked. I don't know." And then the screen changed. "They're coming," it read. "Gary," Mary tried to say, but we were interrupted by a loud knocking on the door. "Mr. Widmore, open up," a manly voice said from the other side. "What's going on, Gary?" Mary asked. "I don't know, stay here." I opened the door to find two men dressed in dark uniforms. They were both armed, though they weren't wielding their weapons. "Mr. Widmore, you need to come with us," they said. Mary tried to protest, but they ignored her. I tried to calm her down as they ushered me towards their car. As much as I begged for answers, they wouldn't give me any. I turned around to say goodbye to my wife, at which point they violently grabbed my arm. "Take care of her," one of the men said. The other nodded in response before approaching Mary. She tried to walk backwards away from them, but the man was too fast. He gently touched her shoulder, causing her to freeze in place, her eyes lighting up with panic. "Leave her alone," I yelled. But it was too late. Mary had been frozen in place by an unseen force. Her shoulder was locked midair and whatever was affecting her seemed to be spreading. I can't breathe." She managed to get out before her entire chest had been locked solid. It was as if time had stopped only for her, freezing each atom within her body in place. "Mary!" I screamed. The two men pulled me into a car, too strong for me to even think about resisting. Once inside, one of them picked up a radio attached to the dashboard. "Initiate Protocol B7 at Stanford Street 7, the man said into the radio. A distorted voice responded, confirming the order. I looked down at my arm. Red marks had formed exactly where they had grabbed me. It hurt, even bruising, as if somebody had lit it on fire with invisible flames. The sensation seemed to dig its way through my skin, filling my veins and spreading up my arm. "What did you—" I started to say as my words began to slur. The world before me went blurry, and before I could process what had happened, I fell into a black void of emptiness. As I lingered in my own unconsciousness, I saw flashes of places and people that I didn't know. Despite the unfamiliarity, they awoke an undying feeling of nostalgia within me. I felt at home, though filled with jamais vu. A voice called out through the darkness, breaking through the flashes. "Jack, wake up." And with that, I was thrown back into my own body. I was being held by the two men that had kidnapped me, and by the look of my surroundings, we were inside an elevator going up. "He's awake," one of the men stated matter-of-factly. "Nah, it doesn't matter, he doesn't have anywhere to go." There was only one button visible within the elevator, and no sign to tell us which floor we would eventually land on. Still, minutes would pass before the lift finally came to a standstill. The doors opened and I was pushed into a large empty room too clean to possibly exist in reality. All it contained was a few chairs and a desk covered in documents. In the back of the room, an old rotary phone hung attached to the wall with no visible cables connecting it to a network. "What is this place?" I asked without getting a response. They put handcuffs on me as they forced me to sit by the desk, none of them speaking a word. They just stood there with angry expressions on their face. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Do you know where you are, Jack?" one of the men asked. He had called me Jack, a name that wasn't mine, but that had become all too familiar during the past few days. The pit in my stomach was just barely alleviated by the hopes that it might all be a case of mistaken identity. "That's not my name. I'm Gary Widmore." I basically shouted at the man standing 3 feet away. He shook his head. "Do you really believe that?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "You don't belong here, Jack Lawrence. This isn't your world." His words resonated with me in the most horrific way. Parts of me knew that he was right, but I couldn't accept it. My mind wandered back to the little girl that I had found in the alley. Her claims that the world wasn't real rung through my every thought. "This world isn't real," I half asked, half stated. The men looked at each other, a brief moment of disappointment washing over their faces. "Our world isn't yours to destroy," he said while ignoring my question. "Unfortunately, as your awareness of your real life increases, the damage to your surroundings follows suit. It's our job to stop that from happening. Unfortunately, that doesn't leave us with many viable options." I looked around the room again. It seemed so clean, too simple to match reality. Not a speck of dust littered any surface, nor did it produce an echo as would have been the case in such a large and empty space. I felt as if the place wasn't trying to maintain the illusion of being reality. "What are you trying to say?" I asked, though I had my suspicions. "That you have to die, Jack." For whatever reason, the words didn't scare. Instead, my thoughts drifted to the girl again, the only other person that had gone through the same thing. "The girl," I mumbled. You took her too, I said. The men looked at each other as if mulling over how to respond to me. She posed a danger to us all. We did what we had to do. You killed her? I asked, half in shock. He just nodded. Though death remains an inadequate description of the process, simply killing your physical body isn't enough. Your entire presence in this world needs to be erased. I was conflicted. If our presence here would kill innocent people, I could hardly blame them for defending themselves. Still, she had just been a child, and soon I would suffer the same fate. Why not erase me immediately then? Why did you bring me into this room? Because we need to know where the others are. What others? The others like you, intruders that belong in a different world. And with that, the man who had been silent up to that point brought out a cable attached to a syringe-like apparatus. He grabbed my hair and pushed my neck forwards to gain better access, before preparing to insert the thing. Wait, please. But despite my pleas, they jammed the thing into the back of my neck. A surge of electricity shot through my body, paralyzing me instantly. I felt my mind disintegrate. The fabric of reality started to fall apart, revealing mere outlines of a world that never belonged to me. For a moment, I was connected to it, truly merged with each and every atom. For a moment, I could see everything and everyone in the entire world, with just a few strange identities separating themselves from the rest. I knew then and there that these people were like me, humans that didn't belong. And then, as soon as the ordeal had begun, the information was stripped away from me. I was forced into the wrong world that I had known for my entire life, back in the room with the two men. We got it. Take him to the factory, the main interrogator said. The shock from what I had just seen sent me into a panicked frenzy. Who were those people? Where are you taking me? I shouted. They unbuckled me from the chair, leaving the handcuffs on. But as they prepared to take me out from the room, the rotary phone at the back of the room started ringing. The men stopped dead in their tracks. Their calm expressions turned to ones of absolute terror. For a moment they just stared at each other, and then the main interrogator nodded his head, at which point the second man diligently rushed over to the phone and picked it up. "Hello?" he asked nervously. The room fell silent as the man listened to the unknown voice on the other end. It was too quiet for us to hear, but the man's expression looked increasingly worried as the conversation went on. All the while, the interrogator just stared impatiently at his partner. After a brief minute that felt like an hour, he hung up and turned towards us. "Who was it?" the interrogator asked. "They called from the outside. We have to let him go." The main interrogator didn't even question the orders. He just pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked my handcuffs. "It doesn't change anything. We'll still eliminate the others," he said as he pulled the cold metal off my wrists. "Did they say anything else?" "Yeah, he has to visit this address," the man said as he handed me a piece of paper containing a street name and a room number. On the bottom, a strange symbol had been stamped on. It felt odd to look at, as if the mark only partially existed, vanishing from my mind as soon as I took my eyes off it. "He has to visit the core. Are you sure?" the interrogator asked. The man just nodded in response. "And they told me to give him a message." "What message?" I asked. "I'll see you soon, Jack." Those were the last words the men ever spoke to me before they ushered me into the elevator. They looked angry, but more than anything, they seemed afraid of what was to come. I had been freed, but despite my miraculous escape from the facility, I didn't feel safe. After all that, I hadn't the faintest clue where I was going. But still, I had a sinking feeling of absolute dread building up within me, a certainty that no matter what I did, things would only get worse from there. As the elevator lowered me towards the ground floor, I looked at the address. I recognized it as a government building in the center of town, plain enough to fade from memory despite its massive size. I wanted nothing more than to just go home to see my wife, but the thought had occurred to me that even she might be a part of the illusion. I needed answers, and despite my trepidation about visiting the core, I had no other options. The time skips had all but ended alongside my obliviousness regarding the simulation. The phenomenon I had always thought of as an autopilot was simply gone, but with the awareness that I could suddenly see all the glaring holes in the reality that I had been living in. There were fractures in the fabric of reality itself, unknown to the entire population. Holes in the sky appeared and vanished in a split second. While they weren't world-shattering, they were obvious enough to break any illusion that the world was a real place. On the rare occasion that anyone blissfully ignorant would notice them, it could easily have been written off as a trick of the eye or tiredness. Worst case, conspiracies would arise. But to someone who had just been awakened to the true nature of reality, it became painfully obvious just how broken existence had gotten. Was it my fault? The interrogators had mentioned that people like me could break the world, but what was truly the cause of all the glitches around me? For a moment, I questioned how everyone around me could just go about their days and not notice that anything was wrong. But I had been a part of it myself, only able to wake up when somebody literally shoved the truth into my face. Reaching the government building didn't take long. I had already seen it hundreds of times, but only then did I finally notice how out of place it felt. Though it outshined every surrounding structure in terms of size, it was such a nondescript and dark place. There were no people entering nor leaving the place. It simply stood there with open doors, seemingly forgotten by the world around it. Whether that was by design or a side effect of the damaged world, I didn't know. There was no security protecting the main entrance, allowing me to walk into the main hallway, a neatly decorated reception. There was only a woman sitting behind the desk, and a couple of heavily armed guards standing by a set of elevator doors on the far side of the room. They stared at me in silence as I came in, seemingly confused as to how I had noticed the place. I approached the receptionist, not sure what I was supposed to do, so I just handed her the piece of paper. She quietly took the piece of paper while the guards kept their eyes planted on me. As she read it, her neutral expression immediately turned to one of utter fear, similar to what had happened to the interrogators. You're one of them," she stuttered. "One of who?" Please don't do it. Don't destroy us," she begged. "What are you talking about? I'm not going to hurt anyone. I just want to find out what the hell is going on. I want my wife back." They looked at each other. The guards approached us with their weapons drawn, but the woman just shook her head at them and they backed off. "Just go inside the elevator. She'll take care of the rest." "Who is she?" I asked. "Just go." The doors to the elevator opened up and I stepped inside as the guards started on in horror. Without me having to push a single button, it simply started moving upwards. It passed nameless floor after floor, stretching for a distance far outreaching the height of the building itself. Just like last time, I started to realize that I wasn't being taken to a physical place within the building, but a different realm entirely, secure and hidden from the rest of the world. After what felt like an ungodly amount of time, I reached the top. The doors opened and without really moving, I suddenly found myself within a plain metallic room that looked far too clean to even resemble a realistic place. The doors closed shut behind me, and with that, every trace of the elevator had been erased. It simply ceased to exist, or maybe it never had. Regardless of the case, I was trapped with no escape. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing back at me over and over. "Hello, Jack," a female voice called back. But unlike my own, it didn't echo, nor could I begin to even decipher its origin. It came from everywhere and nowhere all at once, causing me to feel disoriented in the large, nondescript room. "That's not my name. Look, I don't know what this place is. I don't even know if this world is real, but I'm not a bad guy. I just want my wife back. It doesn't matter what you do to me, she's innocent." "Where do you think you are?" the voice asked. I looked around the room, still not able to fully comprehend my surroundings. I don't know. What does it even matter?" I asked. Answer the question, Jack. I thought back to all the bizarre events. I knew that it wasn't a dream, but the painful fact that my entire life was a lie had become painfully obvious. This isn't real, I stated as confidently as I could. What does it mean to be real? The woman asked in response. It was a question that I honestly couldn't answer. Though it sounded easy enough, the implications of any answer I could possibly give would all have felt wrong after I had spent my whole life in what could only be a simulation. Do you think the people here consider themselves fake? She asked. Well, I suppose not. Then let me ask you this, Jack. Your friends, your family, your wife, do they not feel the same way that you do? Does their love mean any less because of what they are? How about their pain, their suffering, their fear? Are those emotions not real? She asked. I don't know. Their emotions are little more than electrical impulses surging through an impossibly complicated computer system. Little charges that produce thoughts, ideas, and independent thought. How is that any different from how your consciousness functions inside your brain? That's different. I tried to begin, but it was a thought that I couldn't logically continue. Yes, this world was created by the people in your world. But how do you know that your world isn't just another piece of the puzzle? The being that you've named God or the Big Bang Theory. How do you know that these aren't similar experiments conducted by creatures beyond your comprehension? While your universe might be on the highest level of creation, you can never know for sure, just like the people here. I had so many questions left to ask, but one stood more prominent above all others. Why are you telling me all this? Because, Jack, your wife is threatening to end this world unless we let you go. Your very presence and that of the people like you will eventually fracture the fabric of our reality. That is why I need you to leave. If leaving is an option, why try to kill me in the first place? I asked, getting angrier by the minute. She paused for a moment, allowing the deafening silence of the room to sink in. None of it felt real. As the seconds ticked by, I started to hear the sound of my own heart beating. Because creating an exit leaves us exposed, it would be safer to just destroy you. She had said it so matter-of-factly, reducing me to little more than an afterthought. We don't have much time. Your wife is looking for you, she said. Mary? But I saw her, those men, they did something to her. I said with a shaky voice. Mary is not your wife. You're wrong. I remember her. We have a life together. You did have a life together, but that life never belonged to you. I was overwhelmed by the information and thought that it was breaking my heart. I didn't struggle to believe it. Every odd occurrence, the weird flashes, the dream about the weird glass capsule, the world that I had been living, it wasn't real. But it wasn't a dream either. It was just a place that I had been sent. But why or how, I didn't remember. I took a moment to breathe, wishing that I had been left in ignorance to stay with Mary. But I didn't want the one waiting for me in the real world because I didn't know her. What if I don't want to leave? I asked. If you stay here, everyone will die. She was right. Just like the interrogators had said, my presence and that of those like me was dangerous. I had to leave. You can ask me one more question, Jack, but then it's time to go. I only thought about it for a second. If I was to leave everything I knew and loved behind, I didn't know where I was going. Who am I? Your name is Jack Lawrence. You're 29 years old. You worked as tech support for a law firm. In 2015, you went missing after a traffic collision on Glover Street after a fight with your wife. The doctors who treated you pronounced you brain dead. But after your wife demanded a second opinion, you were sent in for a special treatment, where you were falsely pronounced dead. You do not belong in this world, Jack, and your knowledge of that fact has put this world in danger. None of the memories rang a bell, yet I could see vague flashes of them as the woman spoke. They were so foreign, scary. It's time to go. Wait, I begged. What about the others? I mean, the other real people. I will destroy them. You're going to kill them just like that. Wouldn't you? If a handful of people had to die to save billions, could you not make that decision, Jack? She wasn't wrong, but I couldn't accept that I would kill anyone that easily, as true as it might have been. This is your last chance. You have to leave now, she ordered. How? You'll know as soon as you leave the building. And what about Mary? She'll live. But once you're gone, every trace of your existence here will be removed. To her, you never even set foot in our world. She will live on as if you never met. The entire world will forget you as soon as you step through the gateway to your own world. Goodbye, Jack. And with that, the voice vanished, and I found myself back inside the elevator heading down. The transition had been so seamless, as if the room had never even existed. After all that, I still hadn't the faintest clue who I had spoken to, or whether or not that they were even supposed to be human. But regardless of who she had been, she was right. No sooner had I set foot inside the elevator before I knew how to escape. There would be a portal created in the very same place that I met Mary down by the pier where we had first met. I had been daydreaming, bumping into her, which caused her hat to be caught by the wind and blow into the water. Feeling embarrassed and partially wanting to impress her, I climbed down, naturally slipping on the rocks and stumbling headfirst into the sea. She laughed, and I never did end up finding her hat. So to make it up to her, I invited her out for ice cream. That's where I had to go. The main source of my happiness would be the place that took me away. Once I had reached the lobby, the guards just stared at me as if they had seen a ghost. Their faces turned pale and their hands trembled. They were terrified of me. Why are you afraid? I just want to leave. But that's when I realized that my disguise as one of them had been shattered. They had always known that I was dangerous, but only then did they realize that their world was a simulation. I looked down on my hands and they were messed up, glitched as if my own body was disintegrating. I couldn't hide anymore. I knew it. I just never believed it. One of the guards said, "It's all pointless." And with that, he lifted his gun to his own head and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Blood, bone, and pieces of brain splattered onto the wall behind him as the second guard fell to his knees in shock. The receptionist just cried as she saw me, finally knowing that her entire world was a lie. From that moment on, any person that saw me, even for the briefest of moments, would know what the world truly was. I had to find a way to cross the city without shattering the world, but it was a futile task. Though not everyone that saw me reacted with fear or despair, some even laughed, while others didn't even seem to care. Right then, I was happy that the world would forget me, but that could only happen if I left as soon as possible. But what I hadn't anticipated was the acceleration of the damage caused as I had gained total awareness. The holes that I had seen were all growing and tearing apart the fabric of reality itself. Buildings were getting erased before my eyes and people froze in place as their bodies ceased to function. As the people realized the world was held together by a thin layer of cables and code, it was simply getting too much for the simulation to handle. I started to run, trying my best to avoid people lest the world tear apart before I could escape. While my own death had become the preferable option, I remembered the interrogators repeat that my demise wouldn't be enough. For the world to be saved, I had to either be destroyed or removed. And then I finally reached the pier where I had the first date with my wife. But that time the ocean was gone, simply erased from existence, leaving behind rapidly dying sea life on the barren ground. The sky around the horizon had shattered like cracking glass, but standing in stark contrast to the destruction, I found Mary standing by what used to be the ocean side, staring into the distance. "Mary," I called out. "You're here," she said, obviously in shock. "How did you know where to find me?" I asked. "I don't know, I just knew. I saw you in my memories talking to that woman. I heard the truth, Gary." "That you're not real?" I asked. "But I am. How can you say that after all this time? I love you. I have since the first moment that I saw your clumsy self. How is that not real? Just because this isn't your world, it doesn't make our experience any less important. I grabbed her in my arm, her body pressed against me as tears welled up in my eyes. We had been through everything together, but staying behind would have ensured both of our demises. I don't want to go, I sobbed. As I uttered those words, a hole formed at the end of the pier. Unlike the rest of the damaged, loud world, the hole was perfectly calm, a perfect black void to end it all. You have to, she responded somberly. I'll miss you. But that last part was a lie, and if she had somehow been an observer to our conversation, she knew that. As soon as I set foot through the gateway, I would be erased from their existence. My past, my present, my future, it would all vanish to save their world. I love you, Mary. I love you too, but you have to go now. You have a life out there, a wife. Don't live it wishing that you were here. Don't give up on your real life. She gave me a final kiss before she let me go. The cracks in the world were finally reaching a critical point where everything was falling apart. I just hoped that it could be patched up in my absence. Go, Mary whispered. I ran towards the exit, giving Mary a last glimpse as I dove through the hole in reality. And then it was all gone. I fell through an infinite void as my atoms were stripped away from my body. I tried to let out a scream, but without a physical body, I could do nothing but suffer in silence. But whether an eternity or a single moment had passed, I wouldn't regain consciousness until I found myself back inside that glass tank, filled with a strange liquid that I couldn't identify. There was still a tube stuck inside my throat, pumping air into my lungs and keeping me alive. Through the glass, I could see a woman fumbling around with some buttons. Hold on, Jack, she screamed as she noticed that I had awakened. And with that, the capsule opened and I was dragged into a world I couldn't remember. Oh, Jack, I knew that you would find your way to me eventually, she said as she held my atrophied, naked body in her arms. But I didn't even know her name, nor could I recognize her face. All I had were a few nondescript flashes from our supposed life together. She helped me remove the tube from my lungs, letting the air burn my lungs as I desperately gasped for a breath of real air. I have to turn the system off. I have to stop them from putting more people in there, she said. No, I let out in the weakest whisper. There are people there. They'll die. They're not real, Jack. Yes, they are. Just let them live, please, I begged. The world around me went dark once more as I passed out from exhaustion, and it would be several weeks before I finally woke up in the hospital. By then, the entire facility had upped and moved before the authorities could even be convinced to check it out. While my wife had spent a considerable amount of effort finding the place, she just couldn't do it again, meaning that there was nothing I could do to protect the world that I so dearly missed. During the next few days, I was introduced to old friends and family. I even had a son, one of course I couldn't recognize. To me, he was just a kid that I had never seen before, barely 7. It might make me sound like a bad guy, but I felt nothing for them. I just wanted to go back and see Mary if she was even still alive. Not that it made a difference because she wouldn't remember me. I would just be another strange face on the street. The life I knew had ended, and I had been trapped inside the harsh truth of reality, and I didn't know if I could ever get used to it. I don't know who decided to trap me inside that place nor why. All I know for sure is that there are more people trapped inside there, and they need help escaping before the core can destroy them. I had been a loser for most of my life. I had left school in my small hometown as soon as I could and drifted from dead-end job to dead-end job. I had had a few relationships along the way, but they had all ended in drunken arguments. As I spent my 30th birthday alone in a seedy bar, I didn't think that things were ever going to change. I was down to my last few dollars and I was still sickeningly sober. There was an old blues song playing on the jukebox, and the only thing waiting for me was a night spent in my truck. because I had nowhere else to go. I was on the edge of a desert. The days were hideously hot, but at night the cold bit deep, so I wouldn't be getting much sleep. I shivered at the thought and downed my final shot glass of gut-rot whiskey. I still had a beer left, but I knew there was no salvation in its watery depths, and so I sighed and pushed it away. There was another man sitting at the bar. I hadn't paid him any notice, but as I started counting out my money in the desperate hope that I did have enough for another slug of whiskey after all, he looked at me and asked, "Lousy day?" I laughed bitterly and said, "Lousy life." A reply that put a thoughtful expression on the stranger's face. He downed his own drink in one and then said, "I have an idea that might help, if you don't mind hearing me out." Bars everywhere are full of people who think they know how to solve the problems of the world, and who are always keen to find somebody who will listen to them. Well, I had nothing better to do, and so I shrugged and muttered, "Whatever." The stranger smiled at this and said, "I work at a base that's out there in the desert. It's not somewhere that most folk know even exists, and my contract includes a clause that says I'm not allowed to talk about the work that I do. But there are opportunities at the base for the right type of people, and my guts are telling me that you're the right type." It sounded to me like he was laying the ground for a massive load of BS, but I didn't interrupt as he went on. "They're looking for healthy individuals who are not tied down by families and responsibilities, to earn good money by taking part in an exciting new project." I could still smell the familiar stink of BS, but the words "good money" had made me sit up. "What type of project?" I asked. It was the stranger's turn to shrug his shoulders. "Now that I can't tell you, friend," he said, "but I could arrange a ride out to the base for you in the morning, and the guys who make the big bucks can tell you more." I was a long way from convinced, but I had no plans for the morning worth a worn dime, so I said, "Sure." The stranger grinned and offered to get the drinks in. That was an opportunity that I did not hesitate to take. The next morning, I was standing by the side of the road in the half-light of a new day. I swear that I had woken up in my truck with ice on my skin, and I was lost in dark thoughts when a car pulled up. The driver's window opened, and a man inside said, "I'm here to take you to the base. Hop in." The car looked new and sleek and warm. I climbed into the back seat, and as the car set off, the feeling started to come back in my frozen fingers and toes. The windows in the car were obscured, but I didn't care about not having a view, because there was a high-definition screen on the back of the seat in front of me, with a selection of movies available. "You got everything you need back there?" the driver asked. "A bite to eat would be appreciated," I said. I had not been expecting in-car entertainment and thought that maybe there could be refreshments as well, and I was not disappointed. "There's some orange juice and blueberry muffins in a compartment to your left," the driver told me. I thanked him, got myself OJ and a muffin, and then chose the latest in a long line of sequels to a classic slasher movie from way back in the 80s. Wow, this was the life, I thought, and I settled back to enjoy the carnage on screen, as a bunch of dumb teenagers once again did not follow the rules and paid the blood-soaked price. The credits were rolling on the movie when the car drew to a halt. I got out, yawned and stretched and looked around. As far as I could see, I was in a sprawling complex that was enclosed by a high concrete wall with razor wire across the top. There were a number of wooden huts linked by paths laid over dirt. Over the tops of huts, I could see a group of larger buildings with dome-shaped roofs. I had no idea where I was, and the imposing perimeter wall was making me feel trapped. I would have asked the driver to take me back, but he had restarted the engine and was driving away. I was not on my own for long. A middle-aged man wearing a smart suit was striding towards me. He smiled warmly, headed over to me, and held out a hand to shake. "I'm Dr. Mackey," he said. "I'm in charge of the research at the base. I thought that we could talk over coffee in my office. Does that sound okay?" It did, and I was happy to follow him as we walked to one of the huts. Its interior was set out like a regular office building anywhere in the world. I could see a presentation being given on a screen in one of the rooms that we passed. Further along, there were a couple of people chatting by a water cooler. Dr. Mackey's office itself looked like a hive of activity. A laptop computer sat alongside piles of paper on a desk. There were shelves crammed full of journals. A widescreen TV taking up most of one wall showed a news channel with the volume on mute. And, most importantly, a pot of what smelled like freshly brewed coffee. Once we had both taken the weight off and were sipping coffee, Dr. Mackey asked me for a few basic details. My name, my date of birth, and if I had a criminal record, a bank account, any dependents. The questions came at me quick, but I didn't mind. The coffee was good, and though I did not amount to much, I had nothing to hide. He tapped on the keyboard of his laptop as we spoke and seemed pleased at my answers. After a while, he lowered the lid of the laptop and leaned back in his seat. A new smile came easily to his face. You seem like an ideal candidate for the project, and I can tell you about it once you've made your mark on this document. He slid forward a piece of paper. I eyed it warily. Oh, it's just a confidentiality agreement. Standard practice and nothing to worry about. But if I don't get you to sign it, the lawyers will be on my back. Well, that seemed reasonable enough to me, so I signed my name and pushed the paper back his way. Thank you, he said. I can now share with you the fact that I work for NASA, and that we are planning a mission to send the first colonists to Mars. To prepare for this, we're running a project here on this former military base that will simulate the colony down to the last detail. The structures will be exactly like the ones that we're planning to build on Mars, and the living conditions will be the same. There will be a small group of test colonists who will spend 18 months in the simulation, and they will experience very closely what it feels like to be the first settlers on Mars. If you agree to take part, you will be one of the test colonists. You'll be paid $20,000 a month, tax-free. You won't need money for anything while you're inside, so there will be a tidy lump sum waiting for you at the end of it. A part of my mind was thinking spending 18 months in a fake Martian colony as part of some baloney test was crazy. Another part of my mind was thinking that $20,000 a month, times 18 and tax-free, that was an absolute fortune to me. Count me, I said. He grinned. A good man. There's just one more T to cross. You need to pass a medical. I don't want to talk about the medical apart from to say that it was intimate, and that I passed. Less than 24 hours after I had been sitting in a seedy bar, I was part of a project run by NASA. I was delighted and was keen to find another bar to celebrate my good fortune. But it turned out that my next drink would have to wait. Dr. Mackey introduced me to a couple of orderlies and then said, "These gentlemen will take you to your temporary sleeping quarters. Get a good night's rest because in the morning you'll be entering the colony." As I followed the orderlies down a long, featureless corridor, I found myself hoping that the fake Martian colony to which I was heading included a watering hole selling beer and whiskey. I slept well in these small windowless quarters that I had been taken to, and breakfast was brought to me in my room along with a change of clothes. Figuring that style was not a priority where I was going, I put on the gray overalls and sneakers that I had been given. My name was written on a badge sewn into the overalls. The orderlies returned then and asked me to put the keys for my truck, wallet, and phone in a bag, which they told me would be kept secure until I left the colony. I had virtually no money in my wallet and no credit on my phone, and I had already decided to abandon my truck and buy a new model when I got out, so I was happy enough to hand over my worldly possessions. After this, I was taken down another long corridor that led eventually to a large metal door with a keypad to one side. A code was entered and the door slid open. There was a second, equally imposing door a few feet away. "This is as far as we go," one of the orderlies said. "If you could step inside, please, the outer entrance will be sealed, and you'll be able to enter the colony." My stomach churned at this and I once more wanted to back out. But I had come this far and the money waiting for me when I emerged would change my life. So I took a deep breath, clenched my fists and moved through the open door. It slid closed behind me and then the second door opened, and I walked through into my home for the next 18 months. My first impression was of a sterile and cold space. Strip lights embedded into a curving roof shone down on a small room with bare walls. I didn't know how much the budget was for the project, but they had clearly not spent any of it on making the place look homely. There was another opening opposite me and I could hear voices carrying through from the other side. Well, time to meet the neighbors, I thought nervously and headed on. I came out into a much larger room. A group of men and women wearing the same gray clothes as me were sitting around a long table chatting. When they noticed me, the chatter died away, leaving me feeling uncomfortable. It reminded me of walking into bars in small towns where I was the only stranger. Thankfully, I seemed to be with a friendlier crowd now. People were smiling at me and a man who looked to be in his early 40s was walking over with his hand outstretched to shake. "I'm Pete Williams," he told me, even though he had his name written on his overalls as well. "I'm the senior officer at the colony," he added, which was news to me. His handshake was firm and his haircut short, and I got the impression that he was ex-military. "Jack Taylor," I replied, because it seemed the polite thing to do. And then I added, "It looks like I'm the last to the party. I hope that doesn't make me the bottom of the pile." Williams laughed. "Oh, not at all. We've all got important parts to play here. Let me introduce you to the rest of the colonists." There were more handshakes and a few pats on the back as Williams took me around the table and everybody said hello. There was an empty seat for me, so I settled into it as Williams started to address the group. "Now that Jack has joined us, we have a full complement. I'll give you the guided tour of the colony after we've finished here, but to provide you with an overview, it is laid out as a series of connected domes. These include the control room. I'll stay in touch with mission control from there and use it as my day-to-day office. Then there's the canteen. Mark is the cook." Williams nodded towards a shaven-headed man who looked to me like he was used to being in sealed environments, the type with correctional officers. Williams went on, "There is also the medical center where healthcare can be accessed if required. Dr. Kane here is in charge." He smiled at a woman with flashes of gray in her hair who sat to his left. A young man called Tom asked, "What if there's a medical emergency that the center can't handle? Will we get taken to the ER?" Williams answered, "In the case of any unforeseen emergency, we can contact Mission Control to initiate safety protocols so that an individual can leave the colony. In the worst case scenario, the whole colony can be evacuated. Obviously, these are the last things that anybody wants to happen, because the project would be compromised, but no one's life needs to be at risk here. Is that clear to everyone?" A ripple of yeses and "sounds good to me" passed around the table. Smiling, Williams added, "Other elements include the domes where fresh crops will be grown and the domes where the power and recycling facilities for the colony reside. Think of them as our heart, lungs, and our mechanized organs. Beth is in charge of these." Saying this, Williams looked towards a woman who sat at the far side of the table from him. She acknowledged his words with a guarded smile. She looked about my age, but from her role in the colony, she was clearly in a different league to me. And she was also beautiful, and giving me a dirty look. I realized that I had been staring at her. Feeling like a complete jerk, I looked at the table in front of me. Thankfully, at that point, Williams ended the briefing and told us that he would start the tour by showing us where our individual sleeping quarters were. The next few days and nights passed by in a blur. There was a lot to learn, and I constantly got lost in what felt to me like the maze of walkways and domes. My role at the station was to basically be the dog's body. I fetched supplies from the store I cleaned, and when one of the toilets was blocked up, it turned out that it was my responsibility to deal with it. Williams had clearly swerved my question on the first day about me being bottom of the pile. If there was a lousy job to do, it ended up with me. I did think about quitting, but once again, the thought of the payday waiting for me at the end kept me going. The food was excellent as well. My quarters were relaxing and warm. There was no bar, but after a while, I found that I didn't miss the drink and waking up without hangovers felt good. By the end of the first month, I was even starting to lose weight. As time continued to pass, everybody settled into a routine. We only knew if it was night or day because the clocks told us that. And without any contact with the outside world for most of us, it was like we could have been on Mars. The only person who was speaking to people outside the colony was Williams. He was in regular contact with Mission Control. They were located on the same base as us, but one time when I was dropping supplies off for him, I heard him on a call pretending that there was a delay caused by distance in the transmissions to make things more realistic. Williams could also address the rest of the colony from the control room through speakers placed around the domes. He would tell us things like what temperature it was on the surface of Mars and about approaching storms as we went on about our work. Truth to tell, I thought it was all pretty dumb. Still, another couple of months of us acting as if we were on this alien world drifted by easily enough after this, and friendships formed among the colonists as people got to know each other. I chatted to the others as I went about my work, but I wasn't close to anyone, and that was fine by me. With one exception. I had found Beth attractive the first time that I saw her, and this feeling had grown stronger. But she showed no sign of liking me, and I found myself tongue-tied when I was around her in a way that I hadn't been since I was a teenager, which was so dumb on my part. By the time that we had been in the colony for 6 months, I was feeling like a lovesick fool, and I was still stuck doing menial work. On one lousy day, I was rolling a trolley carrying supplies along the walkway that passed these sleeping quarters when a door flew open. Tom stuck his head out and yelled, "Hey, I'm trying to sleep. Will you shut up?" I snapped out of the daze that I had been in and said, "Hey, don't shout at me, I'm doing my job." This seemed to make him even angrier, and he screamed in my face, "I don't care. I'm sick and tired of all that noise." Now, the colony could be noisy at times, but I reckoned that he was not being reasonable. I didn't want any trouble, though. "Whatever," I said, and I started to wheel the trolley away. "Idiot," he shouted after me, and I heard his door slam. I gripped the handle of the trolley tighter, and I kept walking. I noticed that Josh, who had cultivated the fresh food for the colony, was standing nearby. He must have witnessed the whole thing. He said, "Hey, don't take it personally. I think the pressure of being in the colony is starting to get to everyone." I had been so wrapped up in feeling sorry for myself that I hadn't thought that the others could be struggling as well. "Yeah, well," I said to Josh grudgingly, "that's no excuse for acting like a jerk." And then I went on my way and forgot about it. Until a week later when there was another incident. I had finished a long shift and I felt tired and grimy as I went for a bite to eat. I would have a shower afterwards. As I walked into the canteen dome and saw the menu included plant-based burgers with a hot jalapeno sauce and fries, my spirits lifted. I could see the cook, Mark, moving about in the kitchen. I knew now that he was not an ex-con. He was ex-Navy and he had worked in the galley on an aircraft carrier. And boy, he knew how to fry up a feast. I went to the counter, which was self-service, built myself a seriously stacked burger, and then went to sit down. There were other colonists already there. Jane, who worked with Josh, and Michael, who was the colony's engineer. They were sitting together at one of the tables. They looked to be in deep conversation, and so I left them to it. A couple of tables away, Tom sat eating alone. I had had nothing to do with him since he had bawled me out for no reason, so I blanked him and carried on until I reached the table where Andrew was sitting. He was in his 50s and he was Beth's assistant. I knew that it would be fine to sit with him, but just to be polite I asked him, "Mind if I join you?" To my surprise, Andrew responded by glaring at me. and then in a low voice he growled, "I do actually. I don't know if anybody has told you this, but you stink." I was a long way from fragrant, that was for sure, but I didn't think that I smelled that bad. "Geez, bud," I said to Michael. "Sorry, I've been working my backside off, and I spoke to you in a civil way, so there's no reason to be so rude." He slammed his hands on the table and screamed, "No reason? You smell so bad that I want to puke." And then he shot to his feet and knocked my tray out of my hands. Burger and buns and fries went everywhere. I was left standing there with my mouth open while everybody else was staring at Michael, including Mark, who had been drawn out of the kitchen by this commotion. He looked at Andrew and said in a no-nonsense way, "That's enough." If Andrew had been thinking straight, he would have calmed down. Not least because Mark towered over him and was 20 years younger. But Andrew had well and truly lost it. "Oh, I'll show you enough." He bawled and then ran at Mark and tried to throw a punch. Mark sidestepped the flailing fist, grabbed Andrew by the neck and threw him to the floor and held him pinned down. Andrew struggled and spat and turned the air blue with obscenities, but he was not going anywhere. Somebody must have told Williams that there was a problem, because he turned up after a few minutes. He looked at the scene. Andrew was bright red in the face but had stopped struggling. Mark didn't look like he had even broken a sweat. The rest of us were still in shock. An hour or so later, after Williams had spent time locked in the control room with Andrew, a meeting was called for all the colonists in the dome where we had had our first briefing. Andrew was there, seated sullenly between Williams and Beth. I was trying not to scowl at Andrew as Williams addressed us. "There was an incident today which I am sure even those of you who were not there will know about by now. It was not the first of its type, I'm afraid to say. I understand that it's hard living on top of each other day in and day out with nowhere else to go, but you are all being paid well and are part of an important project. So come on, people, let's lower the temperature and do better." He clapped his hands together, a motivational speech over. I believed he thought that everything was going to be okay. When I went to bed that night, I was not so sure. I slept for a couple of hours tops, and then laid there staring into the darkness. I kept replaying the incident with Andrew in the canteen and Tom in the walkway before that. The more that I thought about it, the more that I was worried the colony was becoming a pressure cooker. I checked the time. It was 6 a.m. My shift started in an hour. I rolled over and tried to get comfortable, and I began to drift. And then I heard a scream. I sat up, my heart racing. I could hear doors opening, raised voices and footsteps in the walkway outside my quarters. I leapt out of bed, pulled on my overalls, and ran out to see some of the other colonists standing in the walkway. Mark stood there looking stony-faced. Beth was trying to comfort Jane, who was gasping for breath. Josh was lying on the ground by their feet. His eyes stared blindly up at the ceiling. At that moment, Dr. Kane arrived. She knelt by Josh and I felt his neck for a pulse. She shook her head and said, "He's dead." And then she looked up at Mark. "Help me get his body back to the medical center." She turned to me. "Wake up Williams and let him know. Tell him that I'll meet him in the control room when I have had the chance to examine the body." Feeling sick and lightheaded, I hurried off. I was with Williams in the control room when Dr. Kane got there a short while later. She told us in a professional tone, "I can't be sure without an autopsy, but I think the cause of death was heart failure." "So it was natural causes?" Williams asked. She continued, "No, I believe the heart attack was caused by shock, and that Josh was attacked in the moments before he died. I found bite marks on his body. They were deep and some of the flesh had been torn away. There was limited bleeding because his heart stopped beating soon after the first bite." Williams looked shocked. Ex-military or not, he had clearly never experienced anything like this before, and I could hear the tremor in his voice when he asked, "Are you saying there's some kind of wild animal loose in the colony?" She looked him in the eye as she responded, It was not an animal. The bite marks were made by a human. Fear raced through me. Whoever had carried out this abhorrent act was one of us, a colonist driven over the edge by the pressure into savagery. Williams was ashen-faced. If Josh's death had been natural, we could have continued the project, he said. But this is a nightmare. We have to evacuate the colony now. I'm going to contact Mission Control and tell them to open the doors. I had to speak out. We have to warn the others first. There's a killer out there. Williams exhaled. Creating panic helps no one. I will put an address out over the speakers and ask everybody to attend a briefing. We can get them out to safety then. But the killer, I began. Williams was not listening. He was pressing keys on the console and speaking into a microphone. Mars to Mission Control. This is a Code 1 emergency alert. Unlock the colony doors immediately so that we can leave. None of us spoke as we waited for a response. But there was nothing. There was no pretending that there was a delay now, and Williams repeated the message straight away. Still, Mission Control did not reply. He slammed his hand onto the control and swore, and then he looked as if he had had an idea. He pressed another key and said into the microphone, Williams to all colonists. You will all know by now that sadly there has been a death in the colony. Please immediately attend a briefing. Michael, can you swing by the control room first? There's a small glitch for you to look at. When he had finished speaking, he actually looked pleased with himself. I was enraged. Who was he to keep the others in the dark and risk their lives? I was about to shove him out of the way and use the console to tell everybody the truth when Mark came into the control room. Williams said sharply, I didn't ask you to come here. With a look of utter disgust on his face, Mark snapped back. You're not an officer anymore and I'm not a grunt. I don't care what you said in your BS address. We've got a new problem. The doctor asked me to stay with Josh's remains. Only I needed to answer a call of nature, and when I got back, the body was gone. Williams looked like he was going to vomit. He swallowed and said in a shaky voice, That's impossible. Well, it's happening. Deal with it, Mark told him. Williams stared at him open-mouthed. This was too much for him. That was clear to all of us. Ignoring Williams, Mark asked, Does anybody else know how to work this console? A voice behind him said, I do. It was Michael. Mark brought him up to speed and he got to it. After alerting the other colonists, he started trying to get through to Mission Control. The rest of us were surplus to requirements, so we left him to it and headed for the dome where we had been briefed back on the first day. That felt so long ago now, and the man who had briefed us with such authority was reduced to a shambling mess. So much so that Mark had to drag Williams along with us. When we got to the dome, Jane was already there. That just left Andrew and Tom unaccounted for, which surely meant that one of them was the killer. But which one? When Andrew entered the dome, I thought that we had the answer. It was Tom who had become a monster. Andrew was still one of us. His blow-up in the canteen meant nothing now as I said to him, Hey, I'm glad you're all right. Only I noticed that Andrew was very pale. He was shaking as well and stumbling. He fell forwards. Bile rose into the back of my mouth when I saw the back of his head, where blood glistened darkly in the fake lights of this fake colony. While the rest of us reeled in horror, Dr. Kane ran forwards and knelt next to Andrew. She leaned back a few long seconds later. He's dead, she said. The same way as Josh, I think. And then she slowly got to her feet. She had Andrew's blood on her hands. With a sad expression on her face, she turned away. She did not notice Andrew's leg twitch. I did, but I was too startled to speak. I just stood there and watched as the ripple of movement spread up into his arms. Finally, I managed to shout to Dr. Kane, Something's wrong. She looked back just in time to see Andrew push himself up onto his hands and knees and then raise his head and look at us. But this was not Andrew anymore. This thing that was getting to its feet now. Its skin was gray and its eyes were pools of darkness. With clumsy, jerky movements, it raised its arms and reached for Dr. Kane. She recoiled and tried to move away, but she was too late. The thing had her in its grasp and was pulling her closer. Its lips parted, revealing yellowed and cracked teeth. It bit down into her arm. She cried out in agony and her legs crumpled beneath her. The thing watched her fall, blood dripped from its mouth, and then its head tilted to one side and it continued to look at her. It is waiting for her to die, I thought, and on the floor, Dr. Kane was silent and still. What now, I wondered. Though in my guts, I knew what would follow. Death follows life, and after death, there is this. Its eyes were flickering open. The thing that had been Dr. Kane, it was sitting up and looking around slowly. There was no sign within those eyes of the compassion that had once shone out. Its gaze was pure evil. It rose to its feet and stood alongside the thing that had been Andrew. Both seemed unsteady on their feet, but both were taking clumsy steps towards us. They were no longer living things. They were creatures of the grave, the undead. I stood there helplessly and watched them approach. I was lost and afraid. I was the animal on the road staring into the truck's headlights. I was the condemned prisoner seeing the needle being placed into my vein. And then suddenly I was aware that Beth was at my side. She took my hand in hers and looked into my eyes. "I don't want to die," I said. She put her other hand on my cheek and said, "Then grow a pair and put your ass into gear. Let's get out of here." She pulled me after her, and Jane followed. Mark had his teeth bared and looking like he wanted to go into attack mode, but Beth called back at him, "Cut the macho garbage and run." And he did just that. Beth was leading us back to the control room, all except Williams, who was sobbing uncontrollably and stumbling in the direction of the outer doors. He disappeared from sight inside the connecting walkway, and then we heard him hammering on the doors and screaming for help. He of all people should have known that that was pointless. The colony was soundproof and those doors could not be breached by any human hand. The only thing that he had achieved was to draw the attention of the things that had been our fellow colonists. They moved after him into the walkway and William's screams grew louder. He screamed now for mercy, but the undead gave no mercy and his screams fell away. In the sickening silence that followed, the four of us stumbled on into the control room. As soon as we were inside, Beth slammed the door shut, locked it, and told Michael what had happened. He looked horrified but held it together and said, "Mission Control, they're still not responding. I've checked our systems and our messages are getting through, so the problem is on their end. I have no idea what else I can do." None of us did from the desolate expressions on our faces, and to make matters even worse, they were outside, the risen dead, Andrew and Dr. Kane and Williams. We could hear them scratching and hitting the door. Trying to reassure myself as much as the others, I said, "Hey, at least we're safe in here. They can't get in. And we can't leave while they're out there," said Michael gloomily. He was right. The control room was our sanctuary and our prison. I said despondently, and even if we could somehow get past the undead at the door and survive, we would still be trapped in the colony. Forget reassuring anyone. I wanted to crawl into a corner and weep. Thankfully, Beth was made of stronger stuff. "I think there's a way that we can leave the colony," she said. "The power units have a failsafe built in to prevent potentially dangerous surges. If the failsafe was disabled and the units turned up to max, the units could explode with enough force to break open the shell of the dome. That would be our escape hatch. But..." She ran a hand down the side of her face, thinking hard. "But we would still need to get past those things outside the door." "I might be able to help there," Michael said. "I could create and transmit a high-pitched signal through the speakers outside that will be agonizing to listen to. We can be prepared and equip ourselves with improvised ear protectors. but the undead won't be expecting it and will be totally exposed. It won't do them any lasting harm, but it should distract them long enough for you to make a run for it. Beth smiled grimly and said, "Let's do it." While Michael was working on generating his audio blast and we all found things to protect our ears, we agreed that Jane would stay with Michael and keep trying to raise a response from Mission Control. Mark and I would go with Beth. To be honest, I would have rather stayed in the control room, but I didn't want Beth to think that I was completely pathetic. With our improvised ear protectors in place, Michael raised a hand. He was going to give us a slow countdown using his fingers. Beth was poised to unlock and open the door. Mark would lead us out. I would follow him with Beth bringing up the rear. Jane would slam the door closed after us. As the countdown began, an unspoken fear filled me with dread. What if the undead were not affected by the signal scream? If that was the case, we would walk straight into their grotesque embrace. But there was no going back now. Michael's little finger curled into his palm as the countdown reached 0 and he pressed a key. A howling sound pierced the air. Beth ripped the door open. Mark hurtled through the opening. Pain flared inside my skull from the sound, but I managed to follow him. I could feel Beth behind me, pushing me, hurrying me up. The pain was so bad that it was making my vision blur, but I could still make out 3 dark figures in front of us. They were reeling in agony, leaving us free to stagger safely past them. Michael's plan had worked, but the howl that he had created was still transmitting through the speakers. The pain was unbearable and I felt like I was about to pass out. And then the howl ended and I was left with a ringing in my ears and the mother of all headaches. But I was still on my feet and running alongside Beth and Mark and discarding my ear protectors. The lights in the walkway seemed brighter than ever because of the after effects of the howl, and the domes that we passed through took on a strange ghostly aspect to me. There were plates left on the tables in the canteen, clothes on the floor and a sleeping quarter where the door hung open, a fire extinguisher within a perspex case on the wall. None of them looked real. I gulped in air. Beth linked her arm with mine and shouted encouragement. Her voice sounded distant as well, and I could feel nausea rising and burning hot inside me. "I have to stop. Just for a minute, please." I stumbled to a halt and bent over with my hands on my knees. Mark and Beth paused alongside me. They were both breathing heavily. I rubbed my eyes and raised my head. I was facing a walkway that branched off to the right. There was something in there, I realized as my vision cleared. A darkness moving through the artificial light, moving our way. In the rush of preparing to make the break from the control room, I had no thought of the other dangers which lay beyond its walls. Now I watched in horror as the thing that had been Josh shuffled towards us. Its gray skin was peeling away in places, and I could see the glint of darker flesh beneath. The sickly sweet stench of decay drifted from it as well. The physical effects of death were ravaging its flesh, as would happen in the grave, though it seemed that they were vastly accelerated here. I couldn't begin to imagine the turmoil within its corrupted brain, the diseased thoughts driving it on. I could see, though, the rage burning in its eyes as it came ever closer, and it was not alone. Another one of the creatures had appeared ahead of us. In what felt like a lifetime ago, Tom had come out of his sleeping quarters and bawled me out for being noisy. The thing which dragged its feet along the floor, which observed us through eyes pulsing with anger. This thing had once been Tom, but now it was a nightmare thing that made me want to claw my own eyes out so that I wouldn't have to look at it. But there was no escaping these visions of terror. The Josh thing was blocking the walkway to our right. The walkway ahead, which led to the dome with the power units in, was blocked by the Tom thing. The only way free was to head back in the direction of the control room, where more of the undead waited. By my side, Mark swore and then said, "It's time for some steel." He took a vicious-looking blade out of a case that he had stashed in a pocket of his cook's overalls and told us, I detoured to my kitchen on my way back from the medical center after Josh went walking about. I had the feeling that things were about to go sideways, and while I've only ever used this bad boy for cutting steaks on a Navy ship, I reckon that it will hack undead flesh well enough. I had seen enough horror movies to know exactly where he needed to make his mark. "You need to strike the brain," I said. "I know how to take a zombie out." He growled and strode towards the thing that had been Tom. To keep out of reach of the flailing arms of the other undead thing, Beth and I kept pace with him. Mark came within a couple of feet of the creature that was blocking his way, raising the blade high, and he screamed as he drove it into a dark eye. The thing that had been Tom roared and staggered backwards. Its hands clawed at the handle of the blade, but to no avail. The blade was deep into its brain. Whatever twisted forces were animating it seemed to drain away, and it fell to the floor, where it lay convulsing for a moment. And then it was still, a corpse that was now at peace. Relief flooded through me until I felt a cold, sharp touch on the back of my neck. I looked around and saw yellow cracked teeth, slick with drool, bearing down on me. A scream formed in my throat. It was cut off by the sight of a blade spinning past my ear and embedding itself in the eye of the undead fiend that had been about to take a chunk out of me. The thing that had been Josh toppled backwards and lay clutching at empty air until it too fell still. I looked at it, looked back at the other cold, dead, unmoving body, and then vomited on my shoes. "Come on, action hero," Beth said with a wicked grin on her face. "We still gotta break out of this place." Mark just looked at me and shook his head as he jogged off towards the power units. Beth followed. I was massively embarrassed, but I was alive and not zombified, so I managed a weak grin myself and set off after them. When we had reached the dome where the power units were housed, Beth told me and Mark to stay in the walkway while she went inside to set the units to overload. We were almost there, I knew it. And then a woman's frantic voice said over the speakers,
"Can you hear me? It's Jane. The things outside are almost through the door. Michael's going to."
She broke off for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was riddled with terror.
"They're inside. They are... No, Michael. They've got Michael. Stay away from me. Help me, someone."
Her words were lost beneath the hideous sounds of struggling and the guttural voices of the undead. And then the transmission ended. 2 more of the colonists had fallen, and they would rise again as the living dead. Beth returned from the dome. She would have heard Jane as well, and her face was still wet with tears. Her determination remained as strong as ever, though. She said, "That's done. We need to put distance between ourselves and the power units before they explode." We started to make our way back along the walkway. The dome where Josh had grown his crops was to our left. "Come on in here," Beth said. But before we could take shelter, we heard feet being dragged over the ground and the groaning chatter of the undead. Williams, Dr. Kane, Andrew, Jane, and Michael had been our comrades once. Now they were harbingers of fear. They were revulsion given form. They were zombies shuffling closer, crammed against each other in the confines of the walkway. We were trapped again. Mark looked at his knife and shook his head. It was no use against so many of these things. And then he smiled at us. It was the saddest smile that I had ever seen. He whispered, "Shelter in this dome until the units explode. I'll distract those undead freaks." Before either Beth or I could say anything, he started to yell and clap his hands together. "Hey, this way," he shouted at the creatures, and he started to move back in the direction of the power units. The undead followed. Feeling helpless, Beth and I slipped into the dome and crouched down in the farthest corner that we could find, while Mark had sacrificed himself to save us and lead the undead to oblivion. Moments later, the sound of an explosion filled the colony. Everything around us shook violently and the lights went out. Crouching there in the darkness, I said a silent thank you to Mark, and then I got back to my feet. Beth was already moving off. Once more, I followed in her wake, and by the time that I caught up with her, she was standing among the wreckage of the power units, shining a flashlight at the jagged opening in the wall of the dome. She had done it. The opening was just wide enough for us to squeeze through, and we left the accursed confines of the colony. I looked up into the wide open sky above us and elation flooded through me. I punched the air and hollered, "We made it!" With a big grin on my face, I turned to Beth. She wasn't smiling. "What's wrong?" I asked. She answered, "It's too quiet. We've just blown a hole in the side of NASA's Pride and Joy in the middle of a high-security base, and nobody's come rushing out to see what's happening." I glanced around. The base did seem to be deserted. The huts clustered around the colony's connected domes were quiet. Beth said, "I've got a bad feeling about this. What's that old saying, out of the frying pan and into the fire?" And then her face set in grim determination. She headed for the nearest hut. It was chaos inside. Desks and chairs were upturned. Laptops were smashed, and most disturbing of all, there were dark red smears on the walls and floor in places. I had the horrible feeling that they were bloodstains. Beth said, "I recognize this place. It's where I met Dr. Mackey and he outlined the project to me." She scowled and then added, "Let's go find him." We passed more trashed offices and signs of bloodletting on the way to his office. The door would not open when Beth tried the handle. She was not in the mood for being kept out and with one kick broke the lock. I followed her through and saw a figure cowering in a corner. Dr. Mackey's once smart suit was disheveled, and he was hugging his laptop. He looked up at us with bloodshot eyes and whispered in a hoarse voice, "Be quiet, I'm begging you. If they hear you, they will descend on us and then they will." He started to sob pathetically and couldn't finish. Beth snapped at him, "Oh, stop sniffling, you scumbag. You need to tell us what's happening here and right now, or you won't have to worry about them getting you because I'll put an end to you first." He gulped, wiped his nose with his sleeve, and began to speak. "There was a secret, unmanned mission to Mars 5 years ago which brought a number of samples back to Earth. One of the samples contained elements which we could not identify, and we were concerned it might be harmful to humans. We had to know for certain what the sample would do before we sent colonists to Mars, and so we hid some of the sample in these simulated colonies' domes. And..." He broke down again. Beth grabbed his collar and yelled, "I swear that I'll throttle you with my bare hands. And what? Tell me what the sample did." In a shaky voice, he went on, "The colonist called Tom came into physical contact with it, and the sample infected him with the virus that it hosted. The virus killed him, but death was not the end of the cycle. It was merely a stage. His corpse was reanimated and filled with a primal rage. It attacked another one of the colonists, Josh. The virus was transmitted by biting." Beth threw him against the wall and screamed in his face, "How do you know this?" He opened up his laptop and tapped a couple of keys. Images of the interior of the colony appeared on the widescreen TV on the wall. I could see walkways, the control room where the door had been broken in, inside sleeping quarters. "The hidden camera showed us everything," he said. Beth turned away in disgust. She couldn't even look at him as she said, "So you watched us from the safety of your office. You left us while the virus spread through the colonists and recorded your findings. You heartless son of a..." She span around, faced him again, and said in a low and angry voice, "But something went wrong, didn't it? Outside the simulated colony here on the base." He nodded wearily and said, "There was more of the sample. It was held in a sealed storage unit in one of the huts, but somehow one of the personnel came into contact with it, and the virus was released out into the base." He tapped more keys on his laptop and the images on the TV on the wall changed. The undead shuffled along corridors inside the huts. They gathered in a horde around the ragged hole in the colony dome that we had made. They must have been drawn there by the noise of the explosion, and I realized that if we stayed there, we would have been overwhelmed by zombies and torn to shreds. More of the creatures were at the perimeter wall, clawing at it. I couldn't look anymore and tore my gaze away from the multiple images on the screen. The undead were legion. "We are the last 3 who haven't been infected," Dr. Mackey said, "and it doesn't matter where we hide or what we do, there will be no escape." "I don't give up so easily, you lowlife, a piece of slime," Beth said, gritting her teeth. Dr. Mackey looked at her with what could have been pity in his eyes. I did not understand why until he said, "I have informed NASA of the situation here, and they have initiated a cleansing operation to be carried out by the Air Force. The authorities cannot risk the virus spreading beyond the base, so B-2 Spirit stealth bombers are speeding this way as we speak. They're going to wipe the base and everything inside it off the face of the earth." My stomach cramped as a fresh wave of nausea built inside me. My eyes began to sting with tears. NASA had lied to us, and now they were going to be the agents of our destruction. Once more, though, Beth showed that she wasn't down and out, not by a long way. She ripped the laptop out of Dr. Mackey's trembling hands and began typing. She said as she did, "This human piece of garbage told me that this was a former military base. It looks to me like it was originally from the 50s, which makes me think that there will be a very secure underground bomb shelter. So we need to find the location of the shelter on the plans for the base. Oh, and there you go, I found it." She looked up with a triumphant grin on her face and added, "It's on the west side of the base. We just need to hole up in the shelter to keep safe until after the bombing." Which was a brilliant plan with only one fatal flaw. I glanced back at the screen. Actually make that a lot of fatal flaws. All of them groaning and shuffling and bristling with murderous rage. We were surrounded by a plague of the undead, and the only way that we were going to possibly survive was to find a way to get through them and make it to the underground shelter. "Sounds good," I said, lying through my teeth. Beth laughed bitterly. "Maybe you're not such a loser after all," she said. "If we do get out of this alive, I might even buy you a drink." "You're on," I said. "How about him, though?" Beth looked at Dr. Mackey and said bitterly, "I would like to leave him to be a snack to the zombies, but I want him to stand trial one day before a jury of 12 good men and women, so he's coming with us." She grabbed his arm and pulled him to his feet and then pushed him towards the door. "Dirtbags go first," she said. We crept alongside huts, keeping to the shadows as the harsh murmur of zombies rose and fell around us. At the edge of one hut, we had to dash across the open ground. We made it to the next huddle of buildings just in time to crouch down tight against a wall as one of the undead began to shuffle past. It stopped. It lowered its head to one side. It had sensed something, but we were just out of sight and were holding our breath to try and not make any noise. After an agonizing wait, it continued on its way. We gave it as long as we dared and then moved on. With each cautious step, we saw more and more of the undead. They were hideously close, and yet we hadn't been exposed so far. As we continued to make progress, the stench of their rotting flesh grew. It made my eyes sting and filled my nostrils, and even though I had my mouth clamped shut, it was almost like I could taste their disgusting flesh. I began to gag. Beth gave me a filthy stare at the noise that I was making. I put my hand over my mouth and fought to get myself under control. The nausea remained, but I managed to stop gagging. I held a hand up to show Beth that I was all right, and we moved on. And then Beth made a hand signal, indicating what looked like a metal panel on the ground a couple of dozen paces away. I knew that it must be the entrance hatch to the underground shelter, but I didn't feel any sense of hope. There was no cover between us and the hatch. We would need to break into the open and run for it. But the area was crowded with zombies. I didn't see how we could make it, and I leaned over to Beth to ask her what she was thinking. Before I could whisper in her ear, Dr. Mackey began to sob. "Oh, it's hopeless," he said. "Hopeless. Be quiet. Beth hissed at him, but it was too late. The undead were turning as one and looking at us. And then Dr. Mackey's last grip of sanity must have broken. I couldn't think of any other explanation for what he did next. He stood up straight and walked out into the open. "Please don't hurt me," he shouted. "Take them instead." Drawn to his noise and movement like grotesque moths to a flame, the zombies all moved towards him. Seeing what was happening, Beth pointed at the hatch and mouthed the word, "Run." I was so scared that for a moment I thought that I was paralyzed, but somehow I started to put one foot in front of the other. Beth sprinted in front of me, and I increased my pace. Through the corner of my eye I could see the undead surrounding Dr. Mackey. He was screaming in mindless terror and trying to push them away, but the mass of the undead was too much for any man to resist. They engulfed him and then they began to feed. I saw blood splatter, heard a final tormented scream. Ahead of me, Beth was at the hatch. There was a ring handle and she pulled at it, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I caught up with her and I grabbed the ring as well. We pulled and strained as hard as we could, but from the rust and dirt covering the hatch, it looked like it hadn't been opened in a long time. It was well and truly stuck. I glanced up and I could see that the undead were parting. The faces of some were covered in blood. Some held flesh in their mouth, and others tore at scraps left on bone. It was all that was left of Dr. Mackey, and now they had finished him with their attention turning to us. As one, they dragged their feet across the ground and groaned and fixed us with their dark, furious gazes. Beth swore in frustration and redoubled her efforts to open the hatch. I did the same, and still it held firm and still the zombies inched closer. I gasped a deep breath and I got ready to pull the ring again, and as I did I saw sleek shapes in the sky. They were speeding towards us. It was the Air Force bombers, I realized with mounting dread. Here to cleanse the earth of the undead and us with them. Collateral damage that nobody knew or cared about. Together, Beth and I made one final desperate effort, and the hatch finally moved. There was a glimpse of the space beneath around one side. We raised the hatch and then leapt blindly into the void beneath. Our feet struck what felt like concrete steps. "The hatch, close it," Beth yelled. I looked upwards, undead faces staring back. Drool dripped down from their open mouths. I grabbed the underside of the hatch. Beth took hold as well, and we managed to slam it back into place. As it closed, one edge of the hatch severed the rotting arm of a zombie that had been reaching down. Undead fingers still twitching touched my skin. I pushed them frantically away and began to stumble down the steps. Beth was just in front of me. I couldn't think straight, couldn't tell how many steps I was descending, but I was painfully aware that in seconds the bombers were going to unleash destruction. And then I reached level ground. The beam of Beth's flashlight clicked on, revealing an open doorway ahead, with a massive metal door hanging open. "In here," Beth shouted at me and pushed me inside. I fell to my knees in a dark and dust-riddled space as I heard the sound of the door slamming closed behind me. Above us, the bombs must have started to strike the base. It sounded like a storm was breaking. I stared up into the darkness as Beth came and crouched by my side. Neither of us spoke as the torrent raged. It was hard to keep track of time down in the shelter, but quiet did fall. We still did not move, did not speak for a long while. Finally, it was Beth who took the first step. She swung the door open and headed for the steps. Reluctantly, I followed. My imagination was in overdrive, and I had visions of us emerging from the shelter to find that the end of days had happened. And when we did clamber out into the open, the base was devastated. Charred and twisted shapes lay all around us and the perimeter wall was destroyed. We walked towards the open desert beyond, towards life. Before I list the encounters I've witnessed, I believe it's necessary for one to understand me as a person and the circumstances leading to my employment with the Eternal Jubilee Church. I'm not a religious or spiritual person by any stretch of the imagination, nothing against it, but I have never felt compelled by it at all. As a person born and raised in the South, I was at a Baptist church for every service or event no matter what. Large or small, my family was very involved in the church. My grandfather was a deacon, my uncles on both sides were pastors for two unrelated churches, and my father helped out a lot with the youth groups. Suffice to say, we put the Bible in the Bible Belt. I never resented this, and yet I felt nothing towards it. Even as a child, the songs felt hollow. I remember being jealous of my siblings and parents, for they could find happiness and solace in their faith. I found nothing, not even hatred. I wanted to believe, but I just couldn't. After graduating high school, I grew restless of my little town in the coming years. This dissatisfaction with life manifested itself through laziness and other unhealthy habits. Butting heads with my family more than ever over lifestyle choices, I finally cut contact and decided to never look back. I would learn to regret this. Much to the dismay of my family, my significant other and I decided to move to their tiny hometown in the mountains. Having similar upbringings, my partner's family was very involved in the local church as well. Down on our luck, his father begrudgingly helped me get a job as a custodian at their church, the Eternal Jubilee. However, fate had other plans for us. My partner was very eager to get home and yet was so consumed by misery to actually be there. It started off somewhat minor, becoming kind of distant and eating less, but it snowballed quicker than I could have ever imagined. His emotions became increasingly erratic with fits of explosive anger or quiet sulking. He was never an emotional man, so the sight of him weeping was completely foreign to me. I just didn't know how to approach these intense emotions, but they became a regular occurrence. There were some days he couldn't even look in my direction without crying. I would try to console him only for him to become belligerently angry. He apologized to me frequently, but often over strange and vague reasons. But all the same, he would blame me for equally vague reasons mere hours after an apology. He would habitually disappear all hours of the night, supposedly to visit his family. Rigid and controlling, his parents would call daily without fail. They would stop by often as well and would prefer to speak to him privately. They always seemed to be lurking around the corner no matter the day. His parents would very rarely look in my general direction, let alone speak to me. Generally cordial to their son, they would turn ice cold when frustrated with them. I remember seeing him begin to cry in front of his father, only for the older man to push him to the ground as hard as he could. I tried to intervene only for his father to walk away, not even acknowledging my existence. I can't even repeat the vile things that my partner called me for trying to stick up for him. This just wasn't him. It couldn't be. He would have never said those things to me before. And being coerced by his family, he joined a faith booster at their church and was there more often than not. I could not attend due to the special memberships that his family had. I began to see him less and less, maybe once or twice a week. He wouldn't even look me in the eye anymore. Only living there for a month, he succumbed to the battle with his own mental health and took his own life, only leaving behind a note, an excerpt of his poetry. A fly fell in love with a spider, throwing itself into its web. A trap maybe, but one could see the spider had fallen in love with the fly. But instinct is stronger than love. Oh no, forgive the spider for its hunger. But who was trapped? For the spider's heart was in the fly's trap all along. There is not a day that goes by where I don't miss him. I don't understand why or how it took such a drastic turn. I feel guilty for not understanding, for not saying the right thing, for not being able to stop it. I know his parents blame me for his death. After the service, they made it very clear that they had no interest in keeping in contact. I had to keep moving, keep working, keep my head down until the pain goes away. I'm sorry, Wade. I thought that my hometown was small. It makes this place look like a speck. If it were up to me, we would have moved to a city, somewhere with life, somewhere open-minded. But he wanted to come here to the town that would eventually kill him. For as sparsely populated as the town was, there were many different churches in the area, many of them small and secluded, all dwarfed by the monolith that was the Eternal Jubilee Church. It wasn't on any digital maps, and actually finding the massive building was surprisingly difficult at first. A massive peculiar structure, the Eternal Jubilee resembled many of the Baptist megachurches in theory, but its strange layout gave the impression of a building mindlessly built larger and larger. A modern-day Tower of Babel. I know that I keep emphasizing its size and I might be exaggerating just a bit, but it was truly out of place to be in the middle of nowhere. Too grandiose for a backwater church. The top of its ever-tall steeple was tipped in a golden two-pronged implement resembling a pitchfork. That's another thing. There wasn't a cross in sight within the building, at least in none of the rooms that I've cleaned. I'm sure there's more. With the building being empty most days of the week, it is a very lonesome job other than the scattered staffing. The pay, though, was surprisingly fantastic for what the basic duties were. We have a team of 6 custodians: Titus, the bitter curmudgeon, Shifty Dale, Ditzy Pearl, Ignorant Ray Nathan, Quiet Barry, and the forgettable Tom or Tony. I'm not 100% sure of his name. He never wears his name tag for some reason. As well established, I'm not an adamant believer in the supernatural, but the isolation can get to you. Strange noises, odd shadows, figures out of the corner of your eye, rooms changing slightly in layout after leaving. These are very common things to hear on our lunch break. Much to the ire of Titus, the man who was almost as mean as he was old, having seniority, he would often bark orders at the team. He hated the supernatural babble, and hell, he almost punched Ray Nathan for saying, "Maybe the church is alive. I swear that I hear breathing in the walls sometimes." He wasn't exactly wrong, though. The various classrooms, gymnasiums, and offices did all look very similar. It was easy to mistake them, but it did feel like rooms would shift ever so slightly, no matter what Titus or the pastor said. The pastor of the Eternal Jubilee was the eccentric Lysander Sinclair, a has-been rock star turned child of God. Pastor Lysander was an odd man, both in appearance and personality. Short and concerningly thin, the pastor engulfed his small frame in a tacky lavender and gold suit. Despite being ill-fitting, this affront to fashion was his lucky trademark, and he was seldom seen without it. They say that he was beautiful once, before the debaucherous and drug-ridden lifestyle of a glam rocker left him aged and scarred. His features were ever so sharp. High hollowed cheekbones and a finely pointed nose gave the little pastor an almost statuesque appearance. His lips were thin and scarred, always seeming to be curled into a faint smirk. There was something off about his eyes, bright green, feverish, and frantic. His stare always gave the impression that whatever he did back in the 70s still had lasting effects on his mind. The pastor's study was stranger still, a large office of many mirrors with a small golden calf resting upon his desk. Lysander always seemed uncomfortable when somebody went near his study, for one reason or another. In truth, Lysander's band was never quite as popular as he let on, but it always seemed to come up in conversation. The Crazy Court of the Cobra King is the only holy harem song to really gain traction. It's catchy enough, I suppose. He's at the church more often than not, keeping mostly to himself in his study. However, he does have a tendency to haunt the halls and classrooms of the empty church, and guided by his own reflection in the flooring and humming a long-forgotten song he probably wrote. You can tell that when he talks to people, he's focused on his own reflection in their eyes. Pastor Lysander always seemed to surround himself with attractive young men and women. As disgusting as it sounds, his attention would focus on the physically beautiful. The prettier and more willing a person would be, the higher within the church's hierarchy they could rise from what I've observed. Very fickle, he would seem to have a new favorite every other week and would host personal revivals in his office after nightfall. Out of our staff, Lysander seemed very fond of me and would always try to talk to me if given the chance. Maybe that's why I'd always be scheduled for the later shifts. The tall, muscular man with long curly hair always seemed like his main confidant. I can see a deep jealousy and hatred in his eyes. He deeply scares me. I hated being around Pastor Lysander. He just made me so uncomfortable, the almost whimsical melodic way that he spoke, his rough, uncanny androgyny, the unblinking, panicked stare that could strip any man down to his very core. For as strange as this man is, the people of this town are fiercely loyal to Pastor Lysander and the Eternal Jubilee Church. With how they talk about him, you would think that Lysander is their god. Interestingly enough, a lot of the members of the church are bizarrely wealthy. Suffice to say, both the pastor and the offering plate are spoiled by the populace. I was very skeptical at first. The stories that were told in the break room would get increasingly bizarre. Horned shadows, beautiful women with gold coins for eyes appearing in mirrors, passing rooms with young men dancing naked only for them to disappear without a trace, hoof marks on carpet, and so on. Other than Barry randomly finding a golden coin in his pocket, nothing unnatural has happened in several weeks. Until near the end of one of my many shifts, I had come across the petrified Pearl stuttering out incoherent ramblings. Trying my best to calm her down, I could only decipher bits and pieces of what she was struggling to say. Something pale and torn had run past her, slamming its way to the stairwell of the boiler room below. Now the boiler room was in the lowest part of the basement, and the top of the door frame is too high for most people to reach. However, I could plainly see two massive handprints stained in something that shimmered like liquid gold above the doorframe. Upon closer examination, the basement was entirely empty, other than a golden lock of a woman's hair and a single coin, strangely bearing the visage of a bull's head. "You saw the one with horns. I've been seeing its shadow for the past month." Dale spat overall, unfazed by the tale. And Dale had been working with the church longer than anyone save for Titus, a cold and grizzled man. No one really knew where Dale was from or what he did before getting the job as a janitor. What was known about Dale Ortega was that he's an agnostic and has seen a lot of shit in his day, which is an odd way of wording it since he's 24. A former drifter and self-described survivor. I think it's wise not to cross Dale. Pearl, the cheerful woman who never had anything but a smile, didn't speak another word before clocking out early with a face hardened by fear. She didn't come back, obviously. I heard that she had died in a car accident recently. It's a shame. Ray Nathan, ever the instigator, slammed the coins on Lysander's desk. Lysander, being a man of many nervous habits, began to fiddle with his fortune of gold rings compulsively. "What curious little tokens, friend, but offerings are put in the tithe box." Pastor Lysander cooed in his typical relaxed stupor. "What are they?" Ray Nathan grimaced, leaning down closer to Lysander. He was a large man, thick of arm and thicker of mind, tall, powerful, and imposing. Ray Nathan was a mule of a man and absolutely dwarfed the most likely malnourished pastor. Lysander gently ran his long skinny fingers against the bull's head emblazoned on the coin. "You bring before me man This is mankind, our very nature wrought into being, the reflection of our soul. Lysander's vague, vapid answer was interrupted by Ray Nathan's agitated snort. Save the riddles, Pastor. I want to know what the hell these are and what the hell is wrong with this place. I put up with enough. You've heard the stories down to the last detail. You've never attended one of our services, Mr. Raymond. I'm sure a sermon would enlighten you. I was born Baptist and I'll die Baptist. Now whatever the hell you are. Ray Nathan's outburst into uncontrollable anger was quickly halted by the pastor's eyes. For the first time since the 70s, Lysander Sinclair looked focused and alert. His horrible green eyes, like a viper's gaze, cleaved right through the big man's bravado. I am a prophet of the true God, a brute and assailant such as yourself would not understand. Do not forget your place, friend, the pastor hissed. I assure you this is a house of God. The only thing wrong is those who doubt the word. Now tell me, whose head is on this coin and whose inscription is stamped on it? Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, Raymond. The pastor said harshly as he stuck the coins in his pocket. I must bid you a good day, for I'm a very busy man, lest we forget who else would hire you with that record of yours. Feel free to take the rest of the day off, and I expect a calmer disposition for your next shift. Is that understood? And for the first time probably in his life, Raymond Nathan Morgan felt small. The big man nodded in defeat. It was over. Ray Nathan went into the pastor's office as a defiant, confused man and left a whipped dog. He was never quite the same after the confrontation, not nearly as loud or brazen. He just kept his head down and worked like the rest of us. I surely thought that he would quit. Haunting the halls of the Eternal Jubilee like a somber ghost of his past self. Maybe he saw something deep within the pastor's eyes, a danger hiding beneath the glossy-eyed stupor. The place just felt so wrong and yet so alluring. I would catch myself thinking about it on my off days. Anything to fill my mind in that empty house. Up to that point, I hadn't experienced anything too out of the ordinary. I would hear a strange noise from time to time, or some of my supplies would suddenly go missing, but nothing too egregious. Well, that would unfortunately come to an end. One night I was cleaning up the gymnasium from one of the many damned youth activities that absolutely trashed the place. Alone, of course. Everything was fine until a cloying musk began to choke the entirety of the gym. At first it was merely a sweet and floral scent, yet it thickened into a toxic stench of perfume and scented oils. Out of the blue, I was struck by an uneasiness that I've yet to experience again. Something was off, very off. It was like I was sensing something foreign to this world, something not meant to be here. It's a hard feeling to describe, almost like you found out the world was about to explode. Such panic and awe, both amazement and terror as one. An unknown shape materialized off in the distance, causing my body to tingle with a bizarrely pleasant sensation. I tried to speak, but to no avail, as my mouth was consumed by the vulgar taste of metal and an unfamiliar sweetness. Very clearly in my peripheral vision, a pale naked figure was atop the stage. Too tall to be a normal person with both male and female traits, it bore golden eyes and no noticeable genitalia. Innumerable piercings and chains of gold dotted its body in a sickening shimmer. Whatever this thing was, I tried to pretend like I didn't notice it. Maybe it'll disappear like all the stories that I hear from Dale and Ray Nathan. It just stood there staring with its coin-filled sockets. It was repulsive but also beautiful. I was filled with an unreasonably powerful urge to stare right at it. It took every ounce of concentration to not look at the golden hermaphrodite. Bear witness, And for the most agonizing seconds of my life, I swore that I could hear Wade's voice beckoning me. I needed to look. But just like that, it was gone without a trace. Immediately being hit by intense nausea, I ran to the closest bathroom as my dinner came rolling up. Unfortunately, I wasn't quick enough, retching all over a pristinely clean sink. Amidst the acid and bile, the sweet purple froth of wine began to seep through my mouth. I haven't touched wine in months, and yet here I was, spewing up an entire bottle. Just when I thought that my system was entirely expunged, something violently erupted from my throat. I couldn't believe it. It was a coin. God help us, I just threw up a golden coin. Completely and utterly clean of any bile, the coin was engraved with two lovers locked in a passionate embrace. The voice in my head screamed to run and never look back. Leave this damn town and all these backwater hicks behind. I need to go somewhere lively and normal, somewhere nice, a place that he would still be alive in. But then another voice slithered into my head, smooth and silken. I needed to stay. He wanted to be here, didn't he? Like cloying perfume, 1,000 thoughts of doubt clouded my mind. Isolation is getting to you. Are you going to go crawling back home? Are you going to prove mom and dad right? You're crazy. You can't leave, you couldn't afford it. They got you this job. You not only kill their son, but also spit on their kindness. You're a sinner. He would miss you. The church would miss you. I am not a righteous man. I have always had a taste for wickedness, I fear. A gambler, a thief, a petty dealer, a con artist. I'm not exactly proud of it, but I go by many titles with many different professions. Hell, I would tell you my name, but I would have to list all of them. I blow from place to place, household to household, and bed to bed as I please. Well, until I have to leave. I take what I want and I survive. No one truly gets hurt. They might be down a few grand or so, but in all fairness, they fell for cheap tricks. It's only fair and they learn a valuable lesson. If it wasn't by me, it would have been by someone far worse. Traffickers, gang members, loan sharks. The horrible list goes on and on ad nauseum. I've been around some truly horrible people. Being the scum of the earth, I know true evil when I see it. After a deal backfired in Arizona, my life was in severe jeopardy. Nasty, nasty business. So I packed up as quickly as I could and I ran like always. I drove until my piece of shit car left me stranded in some hillbilly mountain town up in the sticks. A little town of simple people and simple ideas. This was the promised land for men like me, or so I thought. There are two types of locals from what I've observed. Those who are sheepish around outsiders and those who are friendly. Too friendly for my liking. They were on the complete ends of the spectrum either way with no in between. You'd be a fool to trust either. I've lived a life as a liar amongst liars and a thief amongst thieves. I could smell the rot of this place miles away, beneath all the layers of southern hospitality and simple-minded charm. Speaking from experience, places like this always have a dark underbelly. Disappearances, trafficking, and other dealings. Now which flavor of sin is this town's choice is a mystery so far. Maybe that's why I was stranded here. I don't know if I would say it was an act of God if there is one, but there was something here that gave me an itch that I needed to scratch no matter what. I managed to land a job as a mechanic at a dingy little auto repair store on the outskirts of town. The owner, Artie Whalen, had a mouth on him and loved nothing more to gossip. A conspiracy theorist and overall loon, Artie would often go on hour-long rants about disappearances and odd happenings of the town. For a paranoid conspiracy theorist, Artie was uncharacteristically trusting to hire a man who had just blown into town without a dollar to his name almost immediately. He didn't believe in background checks, instead believing that he could gauge a man's character by a glance. A fool, but an honest one. Most of what Artie would say was babble, him mistaking a plane for a UFO or claiming to have seen the Tennessee Wildmen again. Though on occasion he would actually make a little bit of sense. This here used to be Baptist country and the churches had full pews every Sunday. Artie said as he spit a putrid glob of tobacco into the septic tank that he called his dip cup. Until that Hollywood elite celebrity, Lion Lysander, blew into town with his fancy car and his Gospel of Aaron all those years ago. Then all them churches dried up and died out in a span of a few weeks. Are you seeing the picture? A drought of honest holy men in Baptist country. People losing faith in the chapels they've come to for generations en masse. That don't happen naturally if you ask me. If you knew the disappearance statistics. So you think a washed-up geriatric rock star kidnapped all those people? I responded. Blind, so very, very blind. You aren't from around here, so I can forgive your ignorance. Melvin Schneitman, pastor of Anderson Creek Chapel, did disappear. The pastor of Little Senile Church, Ben Crawford, died as well. Though listed as a suicide, I'm sure you can connect the dots. But oh, there's more, trust me brother, there's more. Andy Abernathy, pastor of the E-Fall, gone without a trace. Danny Melbrose, pastor of Millpoint Ministries, decided to mysteriously skip town, leaving a wife and 5 kids. I'd skip town too, though he ignored that comment. I could tell by the little twitch of his bright red mustache that Artie wasn't amused. And the list goes on and on and on. Feels like me and my buddy Emerson, you've met Emerson, remember, are the only ones seeing the dots. I've never met Emerson in my life, but I let him continue his rant. And those who oppose this Hollywood agenda are dealt with by the bull's horns. Oh, I just know he's pulling the strings. That's why every church in this area is either empty or dying out. Well, that giant church keeps on gaining new members. Satan worship, probably. Not completely sure, though. My cousin Rutherford lives kinda close to that hell church and he tells me all sorts of stories. When Artie rants, he gets a certain twinkle in his eye. Like what? I laughed, half expecting him to shrug his shoulders. Oh, chanting and the like. Strange services held all through the night. From the earliest in the morning to the latest at night. Oh sure, they have the clean cookie-cutter services at reasonable hours. I tell you, if they try to mess with me, they have another thing coming. Artie snarled as he put a hand on the oversized camel-patterned handgun always at his hip. Artie was like a human cigarette, pale and thin, but I don't doubt if shit hits the fan that he could use it. You think this little town could have a Waco situation? I chuckled, just to split hairs and rile him up. No, buddy. Waco was big government picking on the little guy. I know pretty much for certain that this Sinclair fella is probably backed by the government. They'll prey on our core values from the shadows. And another thing, sure, he looks like a recovering addict, but way younger than he ought to be. Though I despised everything in this nowhere town, I've grown to like Artie. He's good people, just like the hero of his own little story that he made up in his mind. He might be onto something though. A big church that's unreasonably secluded, led by a former drug addict, has memberships to attend certain services and goes off a religion that's splintered off from Christianity. The whole thing is just a blinking sign that screams cult in the biggest capital letters that you've ever seen. And just like divine intervention, a bright purple 1976 Cadillac Coupe de Ville accented in a lavish gold sped up to our lot for an oil change. The driver, a tall handsome youth no older than 20, had a smug sneer and eyes looking for a fight. Standing around 6'4" and built like a linebacker, the man would have been imposing if not for his long pretty curls and thin mustache. No doubt every girl's dream. I doubt that he would want that chiseled face of his banged up. "Don't scratch the paint," he grimaced impudently, gesturing to a small borderline non-existent line on its paint job. "The last mechanic did this travesty. See that you're careful with it. This ain't no schmuck's banged up car, it's the pastor's." I'd expect a little bit more humility from a pastor. Is he a pimp as well? I calmly smirked, eyeing up the gaudy car. Calling himself a pastor is humbler than you'll ever know, grease monkey. His gold rings glinted in the sun as his hands curled into a fist. Hey, just speaking my mind, friend. It's a free country. Judging by that fancy car, you'd think that he could afford a toupee with that comb-over of his. I can usually hold my tongue, but I know his type. Reckless, vicious, and violent for no good reason, but okay when things don't go their way. People like him are easy to provoke. Whether he can actually back up this vitriol is a different story. I would watch what we say, friend. And why's that? I'd prefer not to be talked down to by a pastor's escort. You have a sharp tongue, friend. I can show you something sharper. The youth cooed in the sweetest venom, flashing the knife in his pocket. Of course, its handle was gold and pearl. "I'd consider heading on, son. No need for this." Artie butted in, hand on his pistol. The frenzy in the boy's eyes never quite left, but he obviously knew that he met his match, getting back in the car with an exaggerated sigh. "All a misunderstanding. I know the pastor would love to see y'all in a sermon, though. We have a special service at midnight tonight for members. You should stop by as guests. It might enlighten the darkness in your life. Have a nice day, gentlemen," he called, every syllable dripping with pettiness and hatred as he slowly drove off into the distance. "That's Lane Vandross, Micah's boy," Artie said solemnly, his voice missing the usual gumption. Former football star, could have gone pro. A specimen through and through. Well, until the substance abuse ruined it all. He was put through the ringer. Lysander stuck his hooks in what was left. He's Lysander's creature now, the youth pastor at that damn church, actually. Artie continued. I almost thought that he was about to cry. A has-been football player and a has-been rock star, they're perfect for each other, I joked. But I could see that jab broke straight through Artie's heart. It's not funny. His father was a good man and he was a troubled boy. That pastor surrounds himself with handsome, broken youth. Young men and women to be used as his makeshift groupies. Calls them his young apostles. It makes me sick. Artie yelped, and for a split second I could feel his sadness. Will he be back to start something with us? Nah, Lord knows. Seeing his boy like that, all doped up and glammed up on that washed up guy's arm. It broke old Micah's heart and his health went down after that. It killed him. An honest man dies and an evil one gets richer. It's the way of the world, my friend, the way of the world. Artie choked up, walked inside his office. He'll probably be in there a while. Curiosity killed the cat, as the old adage goes, though I've never quite grasped this concept. Will Lane try to stab me in some back room of the church? Will some cultists sacrifice me to their god? Or will they actually have a heartfelt service and move me through scripture? Maybe, possibly all three. Regardless, I'm going to go to the church tonight. I can't exactly explain it, but I was always the kid who tried to open his Christmas gifts early. Nobody keeps secrets from me. I am the man of mystery and I can tolerate no contenders. I must find out for myself what is wrong with this place or die trying. A cold and foggy night. It was the perfect time for this, if not a bit cliché. I drove through the eerie countryside roads for the longest 30 minutes of my life. Insanely curvy and poorly maintained. The winding back roads were almost like a rural purgatory. I'm lucky that I didn't get lost within this hillbilly labyrinth, or plummet down a fenceless incline. With all its twists and turns, it felt like I was stuck in a loop. Passing old dilapidated chapels and homes in ruin, I couldn't help but notice many of them were crudely boarded up. Crosses were seemingly torn from their steeples and signs, with these buildings being heavily defaced and ransacked. Come to think of it, I haven't seen a single cross in this entire town other than Artie's poorly faded Lion of Judah tattoo. Stranger still, poles ending in two curling prongs were placed in front of these buildings. In fact, these bidents were scattered all across these sides of the road, some crude and wooden, others of shining metal. They were like a twisted imitation of those roadside memorial crosses dedicated to fatal car accidents. Bows of golden cloth and yellow flowers accompanied many of these memorials, and they weren't kidding when they called the Eternal Jubilee a bit secluded. The church was deep in the mountains, like the wicked heart of this area. Pulling up to the church, fashionably late, I couldn't help but notice the size. I was a little disappointed. Truly it was massive, but everybody had made it seem like it was a looming monument. Big for the area, sure, but not the Bram Stoker castle that I was expecting. The sprawling parking lot was empty except for a scant few cars. The golden bident symbol on its steeple looked almost like a bull's rack. I'm telling you, the longer that I'm here, the more sense Artie makes, and that's terrifying. Entering the lobby, there were a handful of men guarding the doors, many of them I've seen around the town. I pushed past them into the sanctuary. There were a few people in pews praying to themselves or reading from their Gospel of Aaron, but nothing of note. "Excuse me, sir, we need to see your membership ID," one of the men said as he shook my hand, as friendly as can be. "Oh, no need, I was invited by Lan Vandross for a special service. Now I know I showed up late, but it couldn't be over already. This doesn't look too special to me," I uttered with the most patronizing smile that I could muster. The man's eyes furrowed and nodded slowly. A small, slimy smile took the place of the wide, friendly grin. "Oh, so you're the one. Come with me. This service isn't held in the sanctuary. It is for the most faithful. Why Brother Lane would let in an outsider is beyond me. Your journey to salvation shouldn't start at this level, but he speaks with the pastor's interest," one of the men said as a hand gripped my shoulder tightly and slowly pulled me out of the sanctuary. Through the maze-like hallways and down a flight of stairs, they took me to a corridor of many doors and fluorescent lighting, much humbler than the rest of the gaudy church. Producing a key, my chauffeur unlocked one of the countless doors to reveal a large room. The strong, unmistakable miasma of sweat, wine, and perfume punched me right in the face. The door behind me slammed shut with the haunting sound of a lock. As the room was dimly lit, I could hardly comprehend what I was looking at. It was like a shifting mass of arms and legs. Countless men and women, all naked, embraced each other sensually in an erotic cluster of sweat and spit. A band of naked men covering their faces in bulls' heads played gilded instruments to an ominous melody. Serving women, their bodies wrapped in golden chains, poured a cloying wine on the participants as they began to chant. 6 naked men, each armed with knives, lined the walls and stood unsettlingly still. Their faces were obscured by the darkness, yet their athletic frames were as clear as day. They would be quick, too quick for me. Standing tall and menacing, I could swear their flickering shadows looked like ancient hoplites. Crested and horned panoplies danced across the walls, only to wither back into mundane shade and shadow. Panic and fear can pollute the mind, playing all sorts of tricks, but I know what I saw. A troop of castrated men, all dressed as some sort of nymph or satyr, drunkenly danced around the congregation in a circle. Golden bands and circlets of thorns lined their arms and brows, with their legs contorted awkwardly by their hooved stilts. Every moment had to be agony, yet they stomped, twirled, and gyrated wildly, singing through slurred and painful hymns. An unending smile was plastered to each face. 4 older men were bound to podiums by gilded chains, each bearing an ornate lantern. Their eyes and mouths were covered by golden cloth, tightly wound around their heads. Laurel crowns rested upon their brows and bullhorn codpieces covered their genitalia. Their fleshy, pale bodies were crisscrossed in many gruesome lashes and bite marks. Bobbing their heads slowly in tune with the beat, you could hear them faintly yet joyfully humming to themselves. A serving woman, her nails long and sharply pointed, cruelly raked a terrible gash into one of the bound elders' abdomen. The man's painful howl blossomed into a gleeful purr as she pressed her finger deep into the wound. Dear God, Artie was right. I've seen a lot in my time, but nothing can accurately describe the pure disgust and fear I felt. I needed to keep calm. By God, keep calm. And from the darkness, Lane Vandross slinked forward, his nipples and navel pierced in gold. A strange necklace of golden coins rested in between the mighty horns of a bull obscenely tattooed to his chest. With a beautiful woman and a petite man on each arm, Lane blew a burning cloud of strange-smelling smoke into my face. Welcome to our jubilation, friend. What is this? I asked, quieter than a whisper. This is freedom, he responded as he squeezed the flesh of his two lovers. Everyone in this pit of sin went quiet and reared their heads to stare in my direction. Why show me this? Why bring me here? You are troubled. We were just like you until our souls were let free. Society and their false gods try to crush you beneath their heel, keep you weak and chained. Our God is liberation. He abhors normality and depression, for he is a God of freedom and love. Oh, but don't worry, friend. The pastor will forgive your blasphemy, for he knows you. There has to be some kind of mistake. I'm not from here. I don't know any of you. I don't want any of this. I stammered, trying my best to hold my ground. Don't you wish to be free? Out there they control everything, but in here we can do whatever we desire, for that is freedom. Lane asserted before delivering a hard punch to a bold elder's jaw. The older man went limp for a second, only to hum the melody louder in a gracious haze. I tried to choke out a response, only for Lane's smile to grow greater. Gently rubbing his hand along his male lover's ear, Lane ripped his golden earring free without a second thought. For true freedom, nothing should be denied. Instinct is law and every desire should be acted upon. This is the way of the bull. Are you a bull or a sheep, friend? Slave or master? I'm a mechanic. A simple, nothing mechanic. I retorted, trying my best to locate another exit to no avail. But the pastor saw. He stuttered, almost like a confused child. Judging by Lane's cadence, his mind was muddled by some form of stimulant. Your pastor saw nothing. I am a mechanic, nothing more, nothing less. You are mistaken. I will never speak of this night again, I swear, just let me go. I protested with the last drop of confidence that I could muster. Then why come? Lane murmured, struggling to find his words through the thick brain fog as he put out his strange cigarette on the woman's arm. Without making any sound, the woman barely even winced. You could see a great sadness in her eyes, though. A sadness not even in the thick veils of debauchery and intoxication could hide. I was curious, very curious about your religion. I don't know, I just wanted to see it for myself. It was a mistake. This is all a mistake, so I think it's time. My ramblings were interrupted by Lane's ghastly blare. It was a sickly, unnatural sound, more cackle than wheeze and more roar than cackle. I think it was a strained laugh, a rotting laugh of a boy who has been rotten to his very core. Almost stumbling over, Lane caught himself on his young male lover, viciously digging his long nails into the man's flesh. A dark trickle of blood now stained Lane's hand. Elaine began to obscenely flick his tongue, rasping for air in between his labored giggles. Bearing most of his weight down on his two petite lovers, it was evident that they were struggling to keep Lane upright. "Where did that sharp tongue of yours go, friend? No joke, no remarks. I was at least hoping that you would be amusing. Not so funny when there's no jackass with a gun protecting you. And the pastor sees something in you, a sad joke. You know what I see, just a coward hiding in a brave man's shadow." While the smug smile never parted during his rant, Lane's eyes looked like he was about to cry. His mouth screamed of bravado and damnation, while his eyes whispered of doubt and sorrow. "Lane, this was a mistake. I think you need to sit down. You don't seem well. Let's just calm down and talk this out, okay?" Pity graced my voice for the first time in years. Artie was right again. Lane was only a boy turned into whatever this is. A mistake, a mistake, a mistake. A mistake, true enough. The arrogance to come here to mock us. I knew that you were nothing from the start. Lane's telltale anger started to bubble with his ecstatic smile shrinking into a sour frown. Aggressively pushing aside the man and woman clinging to his impressive form, Lane yanked a small shiny object from a podium. Flick. Lane Vandross, now with a knife in hand, scuttled towards me. His movements were jittery and his pupils were heavily dilated. In that moment, he seemed anything but human. His drunken stupor had turned into a primitive rage, drooling all over himself with a beastly hiss. The tall, handsome man was gone and a Neanderthal stood in his place. "Thank you, Brother Lane, that will be enough," a high-pitched voice called out from the darkness. The leading musician removed his bull's head, revealing an older man with haunting green eyes and a silver gold comb-over. His nails were lacquered in gold with many bracelets and rings gently clinking like a warning rattlesnake's tail. Descending from the stage, the servants draped a robe of golden snakeskin around his emaciated form. The congregation, groveling, tried to caress and kiss even the ground that he walked on. Lysander Sinclair in the flesh. He's worse than I could ever imagine. Like the flick of a switch, Lane snapped out of his murderous daze, throwing himself to Lysander's feet. Lane seemed deathly afraid of this little old man. Running his fingers gently through Lane's hair, Lysander then painfully yanked a handful of auburn hair from Lane's head, before delicately kissing him on the cheek. "Still yourself, Brother Lane. We have a friend in our midst. Need we discuss hospitality again?" "No, Pastor." As Aaron cast the golden calf to his liking, so did the bull of the golden horns cast humanity to his liking. Man made God and God made man, we are one. And pray tell, why do you run so, O man of many names? We are far from Arizona, child. Do you yearn for a true home? The older man asked, approaching me ever so slowly. "You know nothing about me." "Oh, the bull of golden horns tells me many things. His muses come to me through dreams ever since I was a little boy. I was always their favorite, giving me the prettiest of coins. You would fit right in with us. We will be your family. We'll be your home." Lysander chimed, his voice almost like a songbird's. "Your manservant threatened to kill me," I squawked, half sob and half laughter. "Oh, I apologize for Brother Lane's brutishness. He invited you here with the intention of giving you to the rack, but I will not let that happen to you, friend." His tone was almost childish, always with that horrible melody. I was tired of running, tired of lying, tired of trying to survive. The only thing left was hate in my heart, true unbridled hate for this scrawny old man talking down to me. I spit at him with the most disrespectful and disgusting glob that I could cough up, coating his pristine robe in slime. "Screw yourself, old man. Do your worst, freaks. I spat defiantly again. Either way, I was probably going to be killed. If I die knowing that I wounded his pride. We were wrong about him, Pastor. He is beyond saving. Give him to me and he'll suffer greatly for that. Lane blustered, spinning around wildly. Lysander gave Lane a nasty backhanded blow. With his calm demeanor melting, Lysander seemed almost animal in that instant. Wrong, wrong. Do not presume to speak to me of what is wrong, boy. The muses speak through me. The bull speaks through me. Gods decide what is right and what is wrong. Do not forget who raised you up, boy. Now get out of my sight. Lysander screeched. The many rings of Lysander left unsightly marks upon Lane's cheek. Like a whipped dog, Lane slinked back into the darkness. Lysander's gaze focused back onto me, regaining that hideous scarred smile. I know what you are. You are lost, child, so very, very lost. Deep down you're afraid of those beautiful flaws that make you, you. We made God and God made us. We are divine. Your flaws are divine, your desires are divine. You know nothing about me, no one does, not even your God. Lysander cackled and began to sing an excerpt from I Fought the Law by The Clash. Breaking rocks in the hot sun, I fought the law and the law won. I fought the law and the law won. I needed money 'cause I had none. I fought the law and the law won. I was completely and utterly speechless. There was absolutely no way that anybody could comprehend what was happening. It was like whiplash. The naked cultist continued to stare almost entranced, deathly still surrounding the pastor. Producing a gold coin from his robe, the pastor smiled and gestured towards me obscenely. Unnaturally shiny, the coin was engraved with a bull on its head and a naked woman on its tail. Oh, can't make up your mind. You're a gambler, man of many names, a slave to chance like many of our herd. So I say, let fate decide by the flip of a coin. Heads, you walk free by the mercy of our God. Tails, I let Brother Lane do as he wishes. With a lackadaisical flip of his thumb, Lysander launched the coin into the air. All light seemed to be consumed by the coin's shimmer, concentrating into a blinding dot. Catching the coin with an audible thud, Lysander's grin widened and widened as his frantic eyes relaxed for a split second. My legs felt numb and my head pounded with dread. I've had a few brushes with death before, but nothing like this. You're free to go. We'll keep in touch. Brother Lane, do you mind showing our new friend out? See you next sermon, man of many names. I've lived up in these woods for years, rarely coming down for supplies. I'd maybe check in with my remaining kin, just depending on how passive-aggressive their messages were. For men like me, isolation is practical. Loneliness isn't as bad as people make it seem. It's like a blanket, warm and comforting, but can smother you all the same. I never was too fond of people even before the war. Well, people never seemed too fond of me either. Kids thought that I was dumb, adults thought that I was strange until even my parents found me too meek. I've always been big, but truth be told there wasn't much that didn't scare the bejesus out of me. Dad would often say, "Boy as big as you are for your age, you sure do nothing with it." I'm sure Dad loved me in his own way, but he would get a bit carried away with how hard he teased me. At home, in public, holidays, birthdays, and night or day, Dad always had a remark to say. He was the one who started calling me kudzu, given the way that I would creep around like the kudzu vine. Before long, the whole town had started calling me kudzu. Even to this day, the nickname is stuck. My only friend was Briar, our bull-headed hunting hound. Briar was supposedly a purebred blue-tick coonhound, though Dad always said that he looked and acted like a mutt. Named for being a briar in Dad's side, it always seemed like I was the only one that old Briar liked. Though I struggled to talk to people, I could talk to Briar for hours. He would always listen, sitting by my side, just staring off into the woods until I was done. He would never interrupt or make cruel jokes. He understood what it was like to be a disappointment. Maybe that's why Dad despised him. Maybe he saw too much of his son in the dog or too much of his dog in his son. But he made me put Briar down. I begged and pleaded. I assured Dad that Briar still had energy left in him. Nah, Briar's too old. Lived past his purpose. What is a hunting hound that can't hunt? And give him dignity, boy. Dad snarled, knowing damn well Briar wasn't nearly as old or sickly as he made him out to be. I couldn't pull the trigger, I just couldn't. I stood there shaking and crying to Dad's disgust. God's sake, boy, can you do anything but mope around and eat? All you do is creep and eat. Just like the vine kudzu. Did I have a daughter after all? The goddamn kudzu queen, fat beauty of the South. Click. I never really made friends after Briar. My only escape was going deep into the woods to think. My grades were a train wreck and nothing actually gave me fulfillment. I had no purpose until the war. An evil and cruel purpose, but a purpose nonetheless. The drums of war can change anyone. Strong men can crack and timid men can grow vicious. While many men broke and suffered, I grew and by God I thrived. I was strong for once, a terror of the jungles. My aim was perfect. Biting through a man's jugular came easier to me than small talk. Briar is far from the only innocent blood on my hands. I was different in the jungles. Barely a man, but I was alive. The thrill gave me life, it gave me purpose, and it gave me faith in a higher power. This was short-lived. I was dragged back to the States when David finally fell Goliath, or while the media did. Pathetic. I would have fought for 5 lifetimes if given the chance. Heaven and hell made one. Just like that, my purpose was stripped from me. Like a pack of hungry coyotes, the guild had begun to ravage what was left of me. Treated with nothing but contempt and hatred by civilians, I fled deep into my hometown's forest. A poor replacement for the jungles, but it's the closest thing that gives me an ounce of comfort and confidence. I have lived here ever since, in my new jungleland with a new Briar. Similarity is an unfulfilling poison. The new Briar is a dumb, useless mutt, but truthfully, I would have gone insane without him. I'm sure people whisper that my mind isn't right behind my back, but I know the things I've seen are as real as day. My property is deep within the woods, a small ramshackle cabin that's about as inviting as a copperhead. I think all of its creaks and imperfections give it character, but I think most people assume it's some crazy hillbilly shack. Miles away from town, I lived without neighbors until that church was built all those years ago. An odd place for a church that big, but I of all people can understand the allure of these woods. However, the scenery is not what brought these people down here. Originally, it was just the pastor and his closest followers from God knows where. Some rock star fat cats probably running away from whatever scandal muddied their fame. It grew and it grew fast. Before long, that celebrity pastor had a firm grip on the town, sinking whatever was left of his fortune into the construction of the Eternal Jubilee Church. It appears that Pastor Lysander has increased his wealth tenfold. There's always some service or event going on without fail. Night or day, the church is never completely empty. Me and the congregation have lived in somewhat of a stalemate for a few years, as they've learned not to knock on my door anymore. I thought that they were some type of Mormons or Scientologists at first, but from what I've heard and observed, this is far from the truth. I don't understand their religion, and I made it very clear that I don't want to. but this hasn't stopped them from straying too close to my property. With a church that big, why they need to rustle around my property is beyond me. I can be polite in my own way when dealing with unwanted visitors, but I draw the line at putting up some weird two-pronged pole in front of my property. The warning shot that I fired sent the message loud and clear, had them running back to their pastor with their damned emblem. I wouldn't say that I'm an aggressive man, but I will not tolerate trespassing and then fiddling with my property. I'm not exactly as faithful as I was, but I'll be damned before I let no faith of mine be displayed in front of my home. I thought that they finally got the message until a few weeks back. Every other day, any time between the hours of 2 and 4 in the morning, you can hear a group of people rustling around my home. I thought that it could possibly be an animal, but it's become increasingly apparent that it's people. Multiple people. This drives the new Briar into a frenzy, though we can rarely actually catch them in the act. You can hear them all scatter off like rats when I come out onto the porch in every different direction. Some may say that I should go to the sheriff's department, but trust me, I'm considered a shell-shocked loon up in the woods. They wouldn't take me seriously. Regardless, the church's roots may run deeper than we know. Being surrounded in the woods would scare almost any man, but I am no stranger to this. Of all the people that they could mess with, they made a very, very terrible mistake. Maybe they're trying to give me my purpose back, a true sign from God. What they actually do out in the woods is a mystery to me, though I can imagine it's anything but good. I'll occasionally find evidence of their congregation scattered all across the woods. Remains of bonfires, two-pronged symbols, and golden coins, interestingly enough. Unsettling, but I hadn't found actual proof that they were dangerous until recently. One morning, Briar led me to a dead deer. A bull's horn had been shoved right through its belly and a coin was placed in its mouth. It was a big buck, too. I couldn't imagine it would be easy to kill without a gun. Truly sick people, but it was impressive. I don't know what they want from me or my land, but I'm no stupid deer to sacrifice. Part of me wanted to confront the pastor of the church, but I would be a fool to enter the wolf's den. They were always friendly enough when trying to convert me at my doorstep, but clearly we are past the pleasantries. Those damned poles were placed closer and closer to my property. They were actively getting closer each passing night. One night, I decided to wait for them on my porch with a rifle. Around 3:30, I was about ready to call it quits when I heard something faint off in the distance. It was singing. These weirdos were singing in the middle of the woods. So much for their hiding and sneaking about. I would punish their arrogance. Nobody mocks me in my jungle. Gun in hand, me and Briar ventured off into the darkness to put an end to this once and for all. The deeper that we went, the light of a massive bonfire grew brighter and brighter. I don't know exactly what I was expecting, but definitely not what I saw. A circle of large wooden symbols surrounded an opening within the forest. A bull's head was nailed to each in a sickening display. Around 15 people, naked and bedecked in golden jewelry, danced wildly around the fire, singing in some language that I couldn't recognize. They sounded beautiful and almost siren-like. Chief amongst the congregation, 4 men dressed in an ancient king's robe stood tall, each bearing a bull's horn in one hand and a golden two-pronged scepter in the other. Pointing their scepters at a random member of the congregation, the cultists then happily plunged their forearm into the roaring fire, graciously crying out in ecstatic pain. The cultist held out a scorched hand to the rest of the congregation. A man hiding his face behind a bull's head placed a single golden coin in the cultist's raw palm. A golden laurel crown was placed upon his brow and he began to sing. The rest of the congregation then turned on their fellow believer, brutally beating the coin bearer as he cackled with glee. Vicious and unrelenting, the congregation didn't stop until the coin bearer was a puddle of flesh and broken bone. They began to fight over his jewelry like a pack of wolves tearing into a carcass, leaving his body bruised and bare. The 4 leaders each placed a tender kiss on his bloody cheek before giving the rest of the cultists to the fire. I faltered. I wished that I could say I fired off a shot and made these freaks scatter off into the darkness, but I just felt small, even smaller than I did as a child. I was just a kudzu vine slowly creeping away. This was no jungle and this dog wasn't Briar. The fire and noise must have scared him off since he was nowhere in sight. The old Briar would have stood his ground. He was a brave dog, everything that I wasn't. The war was long over and my bravery with it. I turned tail and ran, directions be damned. Though branches and bushes riddled me in cuts and bruises, I ran deeper into the forest without looking back. I needed to get away. This is what people bring. They bring nothing but evil and mockery. I need to go deeper and further away from civilization, leave everything behind. From the darkness I heard a familiar howl, not the low growl of the new Briar but the loud bawling bark of my childhood. An old blue-tick coonhound focused its gaze upon me. Its collar was of golden thorns and beneath it lay the bloodied carcass of a dog far bigger in size. Briar. It was Briar. I don't know how to describe it, but there was something off about his form. He was exactly how I had remembered him, but also wrong at the same time, like a faded memory given life. Holding his golden chain, a curvaceous figure weaved itself elegantly between the trees. It resembled an attractive woman, supple and pale with a cloak made of shimmering coins. It stood almost as tall as the trees with many gilded chains piercing its snow-white flesh. Its face was chiseled and masculine, with what looked like melted gold covering its eyes and the top side of its head. The forest began to shift and change. I was back in the jungles in that instant. It was wrong, but it felt right. My terror morphed into relief. I missed this feeling. I missed my purpose. I missed Briar. "Bear witness," it hissed. Its voice was high and haunting but beautiful like a choir of angels and a nest of serpents intermingling in a blasphemous harmony. I don't know if I was sobbing or laughing, but I held up my hand to pet my old friend. Briar, beginning to growl, clamped his sharp teeth onto my hand as these sounds of gunshots rang out in the distance. Just like that, I was back in the forest. Briar and his new owner were gone without a trace. I was alone in the darkness. Was it real? It had to be. New Briar's corpse was still there, savagely ripped apart. Pain throbbed through my hand, revealing a bite mark and a golden coin in my palm.